Hey everyone, welcome back. Chapters 821 through 830 of the previous episode. Qian Ping'an arrives at the Skeleton Shoal on the northern complete reed continent to hone his swordsmanship. He packs his essential immortal items, carries a yellow bamboo slip for mental clarity, and enters the underground mural city. Practicing his signature walking meditation, he maintains a low profile, purchasing replicated scrolls of the celestial maidens to sell later. Refusing to meddle in local affairs or buy spirit puppets, he acts with meticulous prudence and departs on foot for the Swang River Temple. If possible, you can support me via PayPal or become a channel member to help me keep this channel running. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. Chapter 831. The young employee was very stubborn, refusing to relent or request assistance from the shopkeeper even after being surrounded by 4 customers. He insisted that they either hand over the 2 snowflake coins or refuse to pay and suffer the consequences. One of the customers was a brawny man with a purple complexion, and standing behind him was a Een spirit puppet servant crafted by the Flax Robe sect. The purple-skinned man was just about to engage the employee in a physical altercation, but the woman sitting beside him gave him a sly idea instead. As opposed to escalating the conflict, the man slammed a lesser heat coin onto the table as he demanded, "You wanted 2 snowflake coins, right? Give me my change." He was clearly doing this to embarrass the employee. Generally speaking, all cultivators and pure martial artists alike pack stashes of snowflake coins while out traveling, and they should never run out of snowflake coins. Of course, lesser heat coins had to be packed as well, seeing as they were lighter and more convenient to carry around than snowflake coins. As for grain rain coins, they weren't even all that desirable because there were very few scenarios in which such coins would come in useful, unless one was preparing to issue a large payment for a deal that had been agreed upon in advance. "Why didn't you pull out a grain rain coin instead?" the young employee retorted. The purple-skinned man glared at the employee with his arms crossed as he snapped, "Hurry up! I have to go offer incense at the River God Temple." The shopkeeper finally intervened as he said, "That's enough. Give him his change." The employee grabbed the lesser heat coin from the table, then made his way behind a counter before re-emerging with a rucksack full of snowflake coins that he slammed onto the table. The purple-skinned man grinned as he waved a hand, and the Een spirit puppet behind him picked up the heavy rucksack before placing it into a large chest on its back. "You can leave now," the employee said with a stern expression. "There's no hurry," the purple-skinned man said with a sly grin as he placed another lesser heat coin onto the table. "We'll have 4 more bowls of gloomy tea." "Are you fucking serious?" the employee snapped. The woman turned around to face the employee, and her features weren't anything special, but her figure was very alluring, and as she twisted around, her voluptuous chest was accentuated even further as she flashed the employee a seductive smile and said, "You're doing business, so you should learn to rein in your temper." Having said that, I don't blame you for having a short temper, seeing as that's very normal for a young man like yourself. You can have my bowl of tea to help you cool down a little. The customers on the other tables erupted into laughter upon hearing this, and some of the men began whistling and catcalling at the woman while staring blatantly at her chest, as if they were trying to cleave off the pair of mountains there with their eyes and take them home. The young employee was furious, and he was just about to erupt into a tirade against the woman. A young man carrying a sword was sitting beside the woman, and he was already raring to go, seemingly ready to lash out as soon as the employee let his temper boil over. Thankfully, the shopkeeper finally set down his chopsticks as he said, "That's enough. Have you forgotten what I taught you? Do not badmouth people to their faces. That's a rule that's been passed down in our tea stall for generations. You can be stubborn all you want, but don't go verbally abusing people. That's not how business is conducted." After that, the shopkeeper turned to the 4 customers as he said, "Just pretty lady said we are doing business, so we should learn to rein in our tempers. How about this? As a gesture of apology and goodwill, you can have the next 4 bowls of gloomy tea free of charge. What do you say?" The woman giggled in a gleeful manner, while the purple-skinned man nodded in response and put his lesser heat coin away. After that, the 4 of them drank the 4 bowls of gloomy tea on the table free of charge before departing, with the woman turning to give the young employee a seductive look as she left. Qian Ping'an's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he turned to take a glance at one of the bowls of tea on their table. Most of the tea in the bowl had been left behind, and there was some makeup clinging to the edge of the bowl. The shopkeeper made his way out from around the counter, grabbing the bowl before the young employee could get to it before tossing it into swaying river. Jian Lai finished his tea, then set down a snowflake coin onto the table before departing. After leaving Mural City, Jian Lai soon arrived at a crossroads, which included a smaller riverside path and a larger path that was slightly further away from the riverbank. It was said that the river god here really liked his peace and quiet, and the larger path was always very busy, with noisy horse-drawn carriages constantly trundling over it, making it a source of vexation for the swaying river god. Hence, the flax robe sect had paid for the construction of two paths, the smaller of which was meant for sightseeing on foot, while the larger one was for those traveling by carriage. The smaller path that Jian Lai had chosen to walk down was largely absent of people. After all, regardless of how exceptional the scenery of Swaying River was, it was still ultimately just a calm river. For the average tourist, the sense of novelty of arriving on a new continent had mostly already worn off back in Mural City, and the small dirt path was riddled with bumps and potholes, making it far less even and smooth than the larger path. Furthermore, the larger path was lined with small stalls. A fee had to be paid for setting up a stall in Mural City. It was only a fee of a single snowflake coin, but it was still a form of expenditure that the merchants here wanted to avoid. Jian Lai had walked down the small riverside path for several kilometers when he heard a string of feeble profanities ring out from a large patch of reeds in the distance. After that, four people emerged from within, leaning on each other for support, and they were none other than the customers that had caused the scene at the tea stall earlier. All of a sudden, the woman's stomach began rumbling like thunder, and she groaned, "Oh my goodness, here we go again." She stumbled back into the reeds as she yelled, "Get that puppet of yours to stay the hell away. I don't want a een spirit ogling at me as I do my business." Jian Lai's gaze remained fixed directly forward as he picked up the pace. The purple-skinned man took a glance at Jian Lai, while the sword-carrying young man beside him speculated in a quiet voice, "Wasn't that guy at the tea stall earlier? You don't think he's working with them, do you? The shopkeeper spiked our tea, then sent him to rob us." A gray-robed old man massaged his own excruciating belly as he nodded and said, "Always better to be safe than sorry." A dark look appeared on the purple-skinned man's face as he grumbled, "This skeleton shoal truly is a lawless place. I can't believe even a mere tea stall would dare to commit such brazen crimes." A resigned look appeared on the gray-robed old man's face as he sighed. "The skeleton shoal has never been the most hospitable place. Let's just treat this as a lesson that we had to learn eventually and think about how to proceed from here. If the tea stall really is conspiring to murder and rob us, then the rest of the journey to the River God Temple is bound to be an arduous one." The young man took a glance at Jian Lai, then made a throat-slitting motion as he proposed, "How about we seize the initiative? That's surely better than waiting passively for them to spring their trap. Perhaps if we make an example out of that man, they wouldn't dare to go through with their plan." The purple-skinned man was in approval of this course of action. The gray-robed old man still wanted to consider some other options first, but the purple-skinned man had already turned to the young swordsman and said, "You go and take care of him." The young swordsman smiled and nodded as he said, "He looks like a pure martial artist beyond the physique refining tier. If he's hiding his true power and possesses a hero's gall pill, I should still be able to look after myself just fine, but it'll be very difficult for me to take him down." The purple-skinned man took a glance at the gray-robed old man upon hearing this, and the latter nodded silently in response. With that, the young swordsman and the gray-robed old man promptly departed. Shortly thereafter, the purple-skinned man's stomach began to churn violently once again, and he noticed that his two companions had already returned. "Did you manage to take care of him?" the purple-skinned man asked. The gray-robed old man shook his head in response. "He ran away even faster than a rabbit. Either that, or he sensed our animosity and concealed himself in a patch of reeds. There are so many reed marshes here that it'll be next to impossible to find him." The purple-skinned man scanned his surroundings with a dark expression as he said, "In that case, there's not much that we can do. Let's continue onward for a bit and see how the situation unfolds. If worse comes to worst, we'll just have to go back to the dock to apologize to the shopkeeper of the tea stall. We're in a completely foreign land that's known for being chaotic and lawless, so we'll have to swallow our pride from time to time for the sake of safety." The woman stumbled out of the reeds with one hand resting on her hip in a feeble manner as she groaned. "Those laxatives are so strong that they'd be enough to put down an ox. I can't believe they'd use them on a frail and delicate woman like me. Chivalry is truly dead." Earlier, Qian Pingyan had diverged from the small path and snuck into the reeds, quickly vanishing out of sight. Only after traveling for over 10 kilometers did he finally stop to scoop up some water from the river with his hands before splashing it onto his own face. After that, he took a moment to ensure that there was no one around, then stored the cloth pouch that contained the celestial maiden portraits into his minimization treasure. He then leaped up into the air and began treading over the dense reeds as delicately as a dragonfly darting over water, rushing away into the distance. Even with that spirit puppet on their side, those four combined most likely couldn't even match up against a veteran Dragon Gate tier cultivator. Qian Pingyan didn't want to engage in altercations as soon as he arrived on the northern complete reed continent, so he chose to take the path of avoidance instead. As he drew close to the river god temple, there were more and more pedestrians on the small path, and he drifted down onto the ground, emerging from the reeds before continuing onward. Earlier, he had stood atop the reeds, observing the vastly renowned river god temple from afar, and he could see a column of dense incense smoke rising up into the air from the temple. The column of smoke was vibrant and colorful, and it stirred up the clouds above, presenting a breathtaking phenomenon to behold. Qian Pingyan hadn't observed such a stunning phenomenon even in the burial river goddess temple and the green roving residence, nor had he witnessed such a sight in any of the river god temples back home. There was normal incense for commoners, as well as water incense offered to wealthy worshippers. There was a wooden sign at the entrance of the temple denoting the two types of incense on offer, and there was also a young child standing by the wooden sign, informing the worshippers that the quality of one's worship depended only on the sincerity of their heart, not the price of the incense being offered. Qian Pingyan chose not to spare this expense, purchasing a batch of swaying river water incense for 10 snowflake coins. The set only contained 9 sticks of incense, so it was far more expensive than the incense sold at the river god temple in the Azure Phoenix Nation, which cost 1 snowflake coin for 3 sticks of incense. Qian Pingyan pulled out 3 sticks of incense from the yellow bamboo incense tube, then followed the worshippers into the temple. He lit the 3 sticks of incense in the anterior hall, then raised them up high above his head before bowing to all 4 directions. After that, he made his way into the main hall, where the river god's deity statue was situated. It was a majestic statue that was fully gilded in gold and painted with vibrant colors. In the Great Li Empire, the heights of all mountain and river deity statues had to follow academy regulations. This deity statue was over 3 feet taller than even the Iron Talisman river god statue, so it would have undoubtedly been considered blasphemous back home, but given the lawless nature of the northern complete reed continent, there were clearly no such regulations in place. The swaying river god was an old man clad in a suit of golden armor. He was standing atop a vibrant, red snake, and in one of his hands was a sword, while a mace was held in the other. After that, it took Qian Pingyan over an hour to explore the entire massive temple, albeit at a very leisurely pace, and all of the roofs were covered in eye-catching golden glazed tiles. One of the side halls had been constructed to resemble a dragon palace, within which were extremely lifelike statues depicting fish, snake, and flood dragon generals that had taken on human forms. An elderly worshipper made a joking remark to a child, telling them that this was the river god's side palace, and that at night all of these generals would come alive. However, according to the old man, the temple had a nightly curfew, so only powerful immortals would have the privilege of visiting this place after daylight. To drink tea and wine with the river god, Qian Pingyan had lingered for a short while in the rear hall earlier, and he had spotted a set of couplets. He pulled out 3 more sticks of incense and lit them there, respectfully standing on the white jade plaza for a moment, then placed the lit incense into the incense burner before departing. The couplets consisted of golden text over a black background that read, "One who possesses a heart of gold need not kowtow here for blessings, and one who possesses a heart of evil shall be blighted no matter how much incense is offered." Qian Pingyan continued northward after leaving the river god temple. The sun was beginning to set, and Qian Pingyan arrived at a small dock at around dusk. He had to take a boat to the other side in order to reach the malicious Ghost Valley, which was the place that he most wanted to visit in the Skeleton Shoal's territory. However, all of the boatmen had already retired for the day. The boats were tied up to the dock, while the boatmen had returned home. Chen Ping'an offered extra money for someone to take him across the river, but no one took up his offer. They all informed him that they were not to cross the river at night, and that this was a rule that had been passed down for generations. Otherwise, the river god was going to be made at them. There were only 3 exceptions to this rule, namely scholars traveling to the capital to attend the imperial examination, the ill or the injured in desperate need of treatment, or those who wished to end their own lives in the river. Thinking back to how the construction of bridges was prohibited over Swang River, Chen Ping'an decided against flying across to the other side. Instead, he lit a campfire at a peaceful spot near the riverbank, deciding to cross the river the next morning. That night, Chen Ping'an faced the river as he practiced his sitting meditation. An uneventful night passed by. At first light, Chen Ping'an rose to his feet and made his way to the dock, where an elderly yet strong and healthy boatman with glistening, tanned skin was already waiting for customers. The price for a crossing was 8 yen of silver, but the old boatman wanted to wait a little longer as it wasn't quite worth his while transporting a single passenger across the river. He asked Chen Ping'an if he would be happy to wait, and he said that he would be willing to make the crossing once one more passenger arrived. Chen Ping'an was in no hurry anyway, so he raised no objections to this. He removed his conical bamboo hat, then sat down on the dock beside the boatman before removing his sword-nurturing gourd to take a sip of wine. The gourd currently contained homebrewed rice wine gifted to Downtrodden Mountain by Dong Shui Jing. The old boatman's eyes lit up as he caught a whiff of the wine's aroma, and he smiled as he asked, "Would you be able to spare me some of your wine, young master?" Chen Ping'an offered the sword-nurturing gourd to the old boatman, but the latter hurriedly cupped his hands together instead as he said, "I wouldn't want to dirty your gourd, young master. Just pour the wine into my hands." Chen Ping'an duly obliged, and the old boatman raised his calloused hands to his own mouth. After finishing the wine, he smacked his lips together with relish, then asked, "Are you traveling to the No-Return Valley, young master?" "Oh, forgive me, that's what we call that place around these parts, but its official name is the Malicious Ghost Valley." Chen Ping'an smiled and nodded in response. "I am a swordsman, and I was told that there are 3 must-visit places in the Skeleton Shoal. I've already gone to Mural City and the River God Temple, so I wanted to visit the Malicious Ghost Valley next." "I knew you were a young immortal," the old boatman said as he took a glance at Chen Ping'an's robe. "I haven't earned much money throughout all my time as a boatman, but I've developed a pretty keen eye. This robe of yours must be worth a lot of money, right? I have to present myself in a good light while out traveling. Otherwise, people will look down on me." Chen Ping'an chuckled. "I can tell from your accent that you're from another continent, young master. You have to get rid of the accent. There are all types of people here, and the less capable they are, the more they like to band together and pick on outsiders," the old boatman advised. Chen Ping'an nodded in response. "You're in luck, young master. Someone else has come to cross the river, so we can set off now," the boatman said as he cast his gaze in a certain direction. Chen Ping'an turned to discover a hobbling old woman approaching the dock. Upon catching sight of her, Chen Ping'an's expression instantly stiffened slightly. The old woman hobbled over to the dock, and an awkward look appeared on her face upon hearing the crossing fare of 8 yen of silver. She turned to Chen Ping'an with a hopeful gaze, but the latter pretended to be completely oblivious. In the end, the old woman had to ask if he could help her out. She only had 4 yen of silver on her, and she was hoping that Chen Ping'an would be able to cover the rest of the fare. Chen Ping'an merely shook his head. The old boatman was frantically squinting at Chen Ping'an, trying to get him to agree, but all of a sudden, it was as if he had become a wooden puppet that only knew how to stare off into space and shake his head. In the end, the old woman stomped her foot in frustration and said that she would owe the old boatman for now, and that she would repay him the next time she crossed the river. The boatman agreed, and as they crossed the river, the atmosphere on the boat was rather awkward. Chen Ping'an remained as silent and stoic as a statue. The old boatman was clearly agitated, but he couldn't say anything. The old woman was furious at Chen Ping'an for his stinginess, and she gave him a vicious glare, but Chen Ping'an simply pretended not to have seen anything. After a while, he began preaching to the old woman. As if he couldn't help but defend himself, rattling off a bunch of pedantic principles, educating the woman on why she shouldn't blame him. The old woman was so angry that she slapped the railing of the boat, while the old boatman rolled his eyes in exasperation. Upon reaching the other shore, the old boatman was just about to say something, only for the old woman to stop him by tugging on his sleeve. Chen Ping'an jumped down from the boat, then departed without so much as a backward glance. The old boatman was completely flabbergasted, and after a long stunned silence, he turned to the old woman and asked, "You're letting him go just like that? Isn't it a real pity?" The old woman had already straightened her posture and was no longer hobbling, and she sneered, "What should I do then? Force myself upon him? He's the one that was unable to grasp this opportunity, so he can't blame anyone else. He's the first one to have failed such a simple test. If my sisters were to hear of this, I would be made a complete laughing stock." The old boatman couldn't help but feel as if something were wrong. Why did it feel to him like the young man had intentionally passed up this massive fated opportunity? The first had been set by the old woman, and it concerned whether Chen Ping'an would force the boatman to make a crossing with only just a single passenger. The second test had been carried out by the boatman himself when he asked Chen Ping'an for some wine. He had passed both tests, so the boatman was confident that things would go well. Hence, he had done the young man a small favor, intentionally removing some of the illusions to reveal some telltale signs. Seeing as Chen Ping'an had already been to the river god temple, he should have caught on to what was happening, and there was no way that he should have fallen at the final hurdle. The old woman stomped her foot in fury, sinking to the bottom of swaying river along with the old boatman and his boat. The boat was able to travel along the riverbed just as easily as it had glided over the river's surface, and the old woman had already reverted back to her true form, a divine celestial with unmatched beauty. The old boatman couldn't help but pity the young man for missing such a massive blessing. After leaving the dock, Chen Ping'an began running as fast as he could. He would have taken to the heavens atop his flying sword if he weren't worried about attracting attention. After running for a long while, he removed his sword-nurturing gourd and gulped down some wine, then smiled gleefully to himself. "You're not tricking me. I'm now a veteran when it comes to these things." A hint of lingering fear then flashed through his eyes as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. Thankfully, he had been alert enough to see through the old boatman and the old woman's ruse. Otherwise, he would have surely been beaten to death by Ning Yao. Even if she didn't beat him to death, his hopes of getting a hug or even a kiss out of her the next time they met would have been completely dashed. Over at the dock on the other side of the river stood Jiang Shangzhen. He had returned after sensing something, and he slapped a hand to his own forehead as he exclaimed, "I really don't get you sometimes, Brother Chan." The old boatman continued to steer the boat with his bamboo pole, causing it to rapidly shoot downstream like a lively fish in water. This water appeared dark and murky in the eyes of ordinary mortals, yet the old boatman could easily see through it, with the sparkling water fortune essence an absolute delight to look at. Lone ghosts would occasionally swim past him on this river that led to the river god temple, and they would immediately kneel down and kowtow when they saw the old boatman. The swaying river possessed abundant water fortune, and thanks to the fact that the river god didn't seize much of this water fortune and allowed it to flow into the river god temple instead, those who had drowned and become ghosts here would be far more unlikely to lose their minds and devolve into malicious ghosts. As such, this could be regarded as a virtuous act by the river god. However, the river god temple of the swaying river had to pay a corresponding price for this, that being the slower nurturing of incense essence. As incense essence slowly accumulated over time, it was inevitable that a relatively significant portion that should have been used to shape and temper his godly body would go missing. In the eyes of the other river gods, the river god of the swaying river most likely appeared to be mentally challenged. This river god wasn't a cultivator and survived on the incense offerings of the mortal world. More importantly, the swaying river only recognized Skeleton Shoal as its foundation, and it wasn't recognized in the genealogical records of any mortal empire. Because of this, the emperors and rulers of territories located upstream of the swaying river all had very peculiar attitudes toward the river god temple that existed outside their jurisdictions. They neither recognized the temple nor banned it, and the passes along the river neither supported their southward traveling citizens offering the incense at the temple nor did they prohibit it. Due to these reasons, river god Shui Yuanxing was the river god of an illegal temple that didn't belong to the official etiquette structure of any continent. Yet, he was actually working in vain to pursue that elusive hidden virtue? Could he retain any of this? He was working hard for the benefit of someone else, so what was the point of this? Merit and virtue were the most unpredictable things in the world, while being recognized in the genealogical records of mortal empires would make things predictable and transparent. As long as the mountains and rivers were stable and the ministry of rights was in proper order, deities would receive their deserved rewards following each evaluation cycle. This would avoid many negative side effects, and the imperial court of a nation would formlessly help the deities resist and eliminate a significant amount of bad karma. This was the benefit of being able to receive compensation regardless of whether things were going well or not. Without this status and support, however, things would be much more difficult to predict. Once a certain person succeeded in their prayers, who could guarantee that this wouldn't lead to a complicated web of karmic consequences? The divine woman who had walked out from a wall mural had a brooding look. This pertained to their great Tao, so it wasn't appropriate for the old boatman to say too much about his old neighbor, the divine woman. Consoling her right now could very well be an act of pouring salt on her wounds. There were 8 wall paintings of female heavenly officials in Mural City, and these paintings had existed for a long time and actually had a longer history than even the Flax Robe sect. The old ancestors of the Flax Robe sect had gone through great hardships to travel across continents and arrive at the northern complete reed continent in the past, and they had chosen to establish their sect at the southernmost region of the continent out of necessity rather than choice. The Flax Robe sect had offended several domineering sword immortals based in the northern regions at the time, so they were naturally unable to settle down in that area. As such, they had chosen to settle down in the southern region instead. This was only one of the reasons, and the mysterious ancient murals that they had uncovered were another major reason. It was because of the latter reason that they viewed Skeleton Shoal as an area with incredible feng shui. However, the hardships and challenges involved in founding the sect were unknown to others. The old boatman had personally witnessed the gradual growth of the Flax Robe sect, and just dealing with the Een soldiers and Een generals who were ruling over the ancient battlefields had caused the sect to lose no fewer than 20 Earth Immortals. In fact, they had even lost 2 powerful unpolished Jade-tier cultivators. It could be said that if they hadn't been pushed out by the other forces, they could have established their sect in the central region of the northern complete reed continent. If that were the case, then the Flax Robe sect might very well have risen to become one of the 5 largest sects in the continent. This was taking into account the fact that the Flax Robe sect never produced any sword immortals, nor did they invite any sword immortals to become their guest elders. This was actually the old boatman's first time seeing the divine woman's true form. Of the 8 female heavenly officials, Spring Official had been able to travel during her dreams, similar to how powerful cultivators could travel around using their Een souls. Spring Official could ignore many types of restrictions, allowing her to have temporary conversations with cultivators in the world. Spring Official had visited the river god temple of the Swaying River in the past, but it hadn't been long before she had chosen someone she fancied to serve, just like Lampstand and Surveyor. Before leaving Skeleton Shoal, she and the old boatman had made a secret promise with each other, with the latter agreeing to set up a symbolic trial for her and her companions. In exchange, the women from the murals were willing to rescue him from danger 3 times. Afterward, Treasured Top and Ganoderma also left the mural one after another. Following this, 3 of the murals fell into a slumber for 500 entire years. During this time, the Swaying River had already exhausted 2 of its 3 opportunities to receive help, overcoming significant challenges thanks to this. As a result, the old boatman was very invested in this matter, hoping that a new fated opportunity could present itself to a mortal or a cultivator. He would be very glad to see this happen. 1,000 years passed, with things changing constantly during this time. Of the 5 divine female heavenly officials who left their murals, 1 died in battle for her master, while 2 chose to die together with their masters. Only Surveyor, who was known in the mortal world as Immortal Cain, remained alongside Spring Official, who had disappeared for some unknown reason. Surveyor had chosen to serve an impoverished scholar, who had already grown up to become an immortal tier cultivator standing at the mountain summit of a continent. Many sword cultivators had gathered together to travel far away to Stalactite Mountain before, and Surveyor had been one of the few cultivators who wasn't a sword cultivator. Surveyor was traveling on the old boatman's boat right now, but she wasn't accompanied by the 7-colored deer that was also depicted in her mural. Perhaps it was because of this that the mural hadn't lost its color yet. Otherwise, the old boatman would have to wallow in awkwardness together with the female heavenly official. After waiting for a long time and going through much difficulty to finally choose a master to live and die together with, it turned out that the chosen person had terrible judgment skills and failed to pass even the simplest of trials. Not only that, but they directly turned around and ran away as well. If the wall painting in Mural City became a blank line drawing, then wouldn't this female heavenly official essentially have no home to return to? How would she be any different from the ghosts of drowning victims in the swaying river, or the many wandering spirits at Skeleton Shoal and Malicious Ghost Valley? As for the true origin and background of these 8 female heavenly officials, the old boatman was completely oblivious even though he was the river god of the swaying river. If there were no unexpected surprises, then the cultivators of the Flax Robe sect also knew very little about these female heavenly officials. In fact, even the 3 extremely old ancestors of the sect likely only knew bits and pieces about them. The strangest thing about all this was that Spring Official had engaged in a secret but frank meeting with the old boatman back then, revealing that the 8 of them had also lost their own memories. They had slumbered for an unknown length of time, all the way until the cultivators of the Flax Robe sect established their new sect and affected the formations in the area, causing them to finally wake up. The 8 murals appeared to be evenly spaced around Mural City, yet they were actually linked together as one. According to a cultivator from the past, this place was actually a shattered mystical realm. Moreover, the female heavenly officials had attempted to figure out their own origins and backgrounds by observing the structures, flora, books, and other remnant materials in the area. However, it was a shame that there appeared to be an insurmountable gulf in front of them, with everything remaining murky and unresolvable. The old boatman couldn't help but heave a long sigh as he approached his river god temple. The female heavenly official standing on the other end of the boat also sighed softly. Her sigh was pained and tragic, yet it was mellow and pleasant to the ear like an ethereal voice that didn't exist in the mortal world. The old boatman couldn't help but grumble in his mind about that young junior. Just what in the world was he thinking? This young man had appeared quite sharp and smart when the old boatman had secretly observed him before, and he was also someone who adhered to rules and didn't appear stingy. That being the case, why had he suddenly started to act foolishly when a huge fated opportunity had descended upon him? Perhaps it was against his destiny to receive this fated opportunity, so he hadn't been able to grab it even when it landed in his hands? But this couldn't be the case. The fact that the female heavenly official had taken a fancy to him, and decided to leave the mural with her esteemed physical body already said a lot. The female heavenly official turned around and glanced at the old boatman, saying, "Was the male cultivator standing on the bank of the river just then one of the 3 old ancestors of the Flax Robe sect?" The old boatman shook his head and replied, "I'm familiar with all 3 of the old ancestors from the mountains, and they're proud individuals who dislike using illusion techniques even when they leave the mountains and appear in front of others." The female heavenly official pondered for a moment before saying, "Looking at his demeanor, I was reminded of a person whom one of my sisters took an interest in back then. He was a young golden courtier cultivator from another nation, and my sister almost made the decision to serve him. However, this person was far too heartless, so even though following him wouldn't lead to any hardships or frustrations, things would be far too uninteresting for her liking." The old boatman faltered for a moment before asking for the approximate time period that this had occurred. After receiving the response, the old boatman immediately started to feel a slight headache, murmuring to himself, "It can't be that pervert with the surname Jiang, right? That person is the epitome of bad." The female heavenly official unexpectedly nodded and replied, "His surname indeed seemed to be Jiang." The young man was quite bold, and he said that even if none of us took an interest in him in the future, he would still take all 8 murals and display them well regardless of whether he was at home or not. He would then eat and drink in front of the murals every single day. His speech was frivolous, but his heart was quite extraordinary. This person was a libertine who had countless relationships back then, so how could he be described as heartless and uninteresting? The old boatman asked in puzzlement. The female heavenly official shook her head and replied, We look directly at a person's heart and character when we observe them. This is vastly different from the observation method of cultivators, and it's seemingly quite different from the methods of mountain gods and river gods as well. This is a mystical ability that we're born with, and we actually feel isn't necessarily all good. Casting our gazes at other people, what we see is a vast expanse of murkiness and filthy thoughts. There are burrows overrun with snakes and scorpions. There are entangled bodies of seductive beings with human heads and demon bodies, and there are all kinds of other repulsive and unsightly scenes. As a result, we often slumber on purpose, freeing ourselves from frustration and irritation by not witnessing these things to begin with. If we suddenly wake up one day, we'll be roughly aware that a fated opportunity has arrived, so only then will we open our eyes and look around. The old boatman sighed in admiration and remarked, "There are all kinds of mysterious and incredible abilities in the myriad worlds." Surveyor, the female heavenly official who was riding a 7-colored deer in her mural, suddenly turned around to look toward Mural City, narrowing her eyes and saying with a cold expression, "This bastard dares to barge into the residence without permission?" The old boatman was completely expressionless. He thought to himself that there was no need to speculate, and there was no doubt that the intruder was the notorious Zhang Shangzhen. Over at Mural City, a huge swathe of lanterns made using secret methods from the mountains suddenly extinguished at the same time. These lanterns should have remained radiant for long periods of time, only needing to be changed once every 100 years, so their sudden and premature failure naturally triggered panic and fright among those in the city. If powerful cultivators clashed in the city and damaged the foundation of the Flax Robe Sect's mountain and water formation, then the consequences would be unimaginable once Mural City collapsed. As such, several direct disciples from the ancestral hall of the Flax Robe Sect, who were responsible for looking after the 3 murals, immediately rose into the sky and looked toward the source of the commotion, attempting to locate the perpetrator. Once they confirmed that some cultivator was trying to cause harm to Mural City, and seized the opportunity to steal a mural, they would have the power to punish the perpetrator on the spot, executing them first and reporting the matter later. While one of the guarding cultivators from the Flax Robe Sect was distracted and gazing far away, a wisp of azure smoke climbed up a wall near one of the murals, slithering up like a snake before instantly dashing over and entering the mural. Using some unknown technique, they directly shattered the immortal restriction on the mural and disappeared in a flash, with their movement subtle like a raindrop into the lake. Even so, the nearby Earth Immortal cultivator from the Flax Robe Sect still frowned and looked back. He didn't notice anything amiss, but he still felt a little worried. Thus, he apologized to the female heavenly official in the mural before flying over on the wind and stopping 3 meters in front of the mural, channeling a special mystical ability of the Flax Robe Sect and causing his eyes to become a light shade of gold. He examined the entire mural, lest he let slip any small clues. However, he didn't detect anything out of the ordinary even after looking over the mural 2 times. This was one of the 3 remaining ancient murals in Mural City that were yet to give away their fated opportunity, and this specific mural was incredibly important even among the 8 murals. In the secret records of the Flax Robe Sect, the female heavenly official illustrated in this mural rode a 7-colored deer and carried a wooden sword on her back, one side of which was inscribed with the characters, "Blissful Winds." She possessed a noble status, and she was ranked second out of the 8 female heavenly officials. However, her importance was even above that of the female heavenly official who was known in the mortal world as Immortal Cain and known by the Flax Robe Sect as Surveyor. It was because of this that the Flax Robe Sect entrusted a golden courtier Earth Immortal, who had hopes of advancing to the upper 5 tiers with the task of guarding this mural. The middle-aged cultivator failed to uncover any answers, but he still didn't dare to let his guard down. After hesitating for a moment, he looked toward the store located near the mural of Flash, using his mind's voice to tell the young man to immediately return to the ancestral mountain of the sect, and inform the ancestral hall that something had happened near the mural of the deer-riding heavenly official. It was imperative that an old ancestor came here to personally examine the situation. Even though the young man had been very slow and blockheaded when leaving the mountains to help his childhood sweetheart with running her store, his mind and heart were extremely stable when he dealt with major matters. He walked out of the store with a solemn expression, forming a hand seal with 2 fingers before lightly stomping on the ground. A mountain lord who belonged to the jurisdiction of the Flax Robe sect immediately emerged from the ground, and this mountain lord was surprisingly a slender and beautiful young girl of around 13 years old. The mountain lord raised her arms high into the air, lifting up a scabbardless ancient sword which was exuding awe-inspiring sword chi. However, from the moment that she left the Flax Robe sect's Mountain Root Earth Palace located deep underground to the moment that she emerged with the sword and respectfully offered it, the mountain lord who appeared young and beautiful had used an illusion technique, preventing those under the level of Earth Immortal from seeing her. The scabbardless ancient sword was a sword that needed to be sharpened underground all year round. The young man expressed his thanks and held his index finger and middle finger together, lightly running them across the ancient sword and causing it to ring before it soared into the sky. The young man stepped onto the sword, and the sword tip was surprisingly pointing almost straight up at the sky above Mural City as it rapidly ascended. The dense earth enhanced by the mountain and water formation was unable to hinder the young man and his sword, with the two of them soaring into the sky and breaking through the sea of clouds, which was like a white jade belt around the ancestral hall, in one swift motion as they quickly flew toward the ancestral hall. The middle-aged cultivator landed on the ground and smiled as he stroked his beard. Even though this junior was from a different branch of the ancestral hall, everyone in the sect valued him and was fond of him. There were many pedantic rules in the Flax Robe sect, and apart from a select few people, all remaining cultivators had to descend to the ground and climb the mountain on foot once they reached sword-hanging pavilion located at the waist of the mountain. They had to abide by this rule even if the heavens were about to collapse. However, this young man who had been recognized by the pseudo-celestial sword as its master ever since a young age was one of the exceptions. It wasn't that the middle-aged cultivator couldn't use a messenger flying sword to notify the ancestral hall about the situation, but there were many hidden and complicated relationships in the sect. Perhaps the young man was completely unaware of these matters, but this was also the mysterious thing about cultivating in the mountains, knowing but not knowing. If outsiders exposed this, one might appear to understand the situation, but one would in fact lose the fated opportunity that had already landed in one's hands. As such, it was best for the young man to report this matter to the ancestral hall, allowing him to shoulder more of the karmic fate. This might not necessarily succeed, but it at least wouldn't be a bad thing. Even though the Flax Robe sect was extremely generous, allowing outsiders to collect the fated opportunities from the 8 murals in the city, this young man had the best opportunity of any disciple since the founding of the sect to obtain a fated opportunity of the Great Tao from one of the murals by himself. When constructing the sect formation back then, the Flax Robe sect had used hundreds of powerful mountain opening puppets as well as a dozen or so mountain moving apes and mountain shifting dogs, digging more than 5 kilometers deep in the entire mural city. Even so, the many great cultivators who were honored in the ancestral records of the Flax Robe sect had still failed to find the ancient sword left behind by the founder of the sect. At the same time, it was said that this pseudo-celestial tool had many ties to the deer-riding heavenly official. Thus, the fated opportunity of this specific mural was one which the Flax Robe sect would fight for. To turn down a blessing from the heavens was to ask for divine punishment. The young man flew over the sea of clouds on his sword, heading straight to the ancestral hall. Of the 3 old ancestors of the Flax Robe sect, one was cultivating in seclusion and one was stationed at malicious Ghost Valley, and continuing to expand their territory. The last remaining old ancestor was responsible for protecting the sect, and he stood at the entrance of the ancestral hall at this moment and asked with a smile, "What's the big hurry, Lanchi? Has something gone wrong at Mural City?" The young man held the pseudo-celestial tool in his hand, and repeated his Golden Courtier senior brother's words to the old ancestor. The old ancestor frowned and asked, "The problem is with the mural of the deer-riding heavenly official?" Lanchi nodded in confirmation. The old ancestor grabbed Lanchi's shoulder, shortening the mountains and waters to an inch as he instantly arrived at Mural City. He took Lanchi back to the store before walking to the mural by himself, a solemn expression on his face. Only at this moment did the Golden Courtier cultivator realize that the matter was far direr than he had imagined. The old ancestor smiled coldly and mused, "How impressive. This person was able to silently breach both of the restrictions and barge into the mystical realm." The Golden Courtier cultivator's expression changed slightly. The old ancestor waved his hand and said, "Be careful of this being a plan to draw our attention away from somewhere more important." Go and protect Lanqi. There's no need to be too tense, as this is our home territory after all. I need to make a trip back to the ancestral hall so that I can adhere to the rules and burn incense and knock on the door. The Golden Courtier cultivator nodded and went to the store. What's going on? The young woman asked quietly. I visited the ancestral hall just then, Lanqi replied with a smile. The middle-aged Golden Courtier cultivator walked into the store, causing Lanqi to ask in puzzlement. What brings you here, senior brother Yang? I'm just taking a look around, the middle-aged cultivator replied with a smile. Lanqi's full name was Peng Lanqi, and he was the middle-aged cultivator's junior brother, and was only at the abode tier right now. Peng Lanqi's grandfather was a guest elder of the Flax Robe sect, and he was the illustrator of all the female heavenly official picture books in the store. Peng Lanqi was exceptionally talented, and he was the most prodigious sword immortal to have ever appeared in the sect. In fact, he was the opening disciple and also closing disciple of one of the 3 old ancestors, and the reason for this quirk was because the unpolished Jade-tier old ancestor, who was widely regarded as the top 10 most destructive cultivators in the southern regions of the northern complete reed continent, had once vowed in the ancestral hall that he would only take 1 disciple in his lifetime. Taking this into account, it should have been a joyous cause for celebration when the old ancestor had taken the little boy, Peng Lanqi, as his disciple back then. However, the eccentric old ancestor had told the Flax Robe sect not to make a huge fuss out of the matter, saying something that was very true to his strange temper. There's no hurry to celebrate, and we can send out invitations for the banquet when my disciple advances to the Golden Courtier. In any case, this won't take too many years. The middle-aged cultivator looked at the carefree Peng Lanqi and smiled bitterly in his mind. This was a critical moment for his junior brother's great Tao. Inside a mystical realm that appeared much like an immortal palace, a middle-aged man suddenly materialized and stumbled forward, following which he shook the dust off his sleeves and chuckled. My wish has finally come true, and I'm finally able to take a look at the peerless beauty of these immortal big sisters. Oi, is there anybody here? He shouted softly. He slowly strolled forward, looking around and enjoying the ethereal scenery as he did so. However, he suddenly raised a hand and covered his eyes, murmuring, This is the private chamber of the immortal big sisters, so I shouldn't look around and see things that I shouldn't see. To the north of Skeleton Shoal, a young Taoist nun left her sect that was just starting to take shape. As the youngest sect leader of an immortal force in the history of the northern complete reed continent, she traveled by herself on an immortal ship that her heavenly lord senior brother had given to her, quickly darting toward the south. The flowing iridescent boat was a paramount immortal treasure that was even quicker than intercontinental ships, and it could surprisingly jump between 2 iridescent clouds located hundreds upon thousands of kilometers away, similar to how cultivators could use land-shortening techniques. Their flight was silent and rapid. Meanwhile, on the border of Skeleton Shoal and Malicious Ghost Valley, the young swordsman wearing a bamboo hat visited a store run by a cultivator guarding the area, and purchased a thick and hefty book that especially explained the things to be aware of in Malicious Ghost Valley. The book had detailed records of many taboos and the dangers of each area, and the young swordsman basked in the sun as he slowly flicked through the many pages. He was in no hurry to pay the road toll and enter the Malicious Ghost Valley to train. Sharpening one's blade wouldn't delay one's work of cutting firewood. The winter sun was warm, and the young man glanced up at the sky that was clear and blue for tens of thousands of kilometers. The weather today was truly very good. The immortal mystical realm that Zhang Shangzhen was strolling through right now wasn't regarded as a small world, yet it was actually superior to a small world. There were extravagant buildings and wondrous flowers here, with ethereal birds calling and spiritual energy as abundant as morning mist. Each step one took would make one feel relaxed and joyful, and Zhang Shangzhen clicked his tongue in wonder when he experienced this. He regarded himself as someone who had seen much of the world, owning the widely renowned Cloud Cave Blessed Land and having wasted 60 years in the Lotus Flower Blessed Land simply for the sake of helping his good friend, Lu Feng, untie the knot in his heart. Of course, he had also used this as an opportunity to rest and relax. In reality, there were few cultivators as carefree and removed from mortal matters as Zhang Shangzhen. There were countless challenges and barriers on the path of cultivation, and whether or not one was fortunate enough to obtain fated opportunities was naturally very important. However, slowly accumulating experience and strength before quickly soaring to great heights one day was a paramount and timeless method that cultivators had to concede was incredibly effective. When visiting Mural City back then, Zhang Shangzhen hadn't won over any of the female heavenly officials with his bold and ambitious words. Zhang Shangzhen hadn't thought much about this, but out of curiosity, he had asked sect leader Sun Yuan about the secrets of the Flax Robe sect and the murals after returning to the Parasol Leaf Continent's Jade Tablet sect. He had asked the right person, and the immortal tier cultivator's familiarity with the many celestial maidens and divine maidens in the world was, in Zhang Shangzhen's words, simply shocking. Sun Yuan had especially traveled to the Middle Earth Divine Continent's Bamboo Sea Small World in the past simply for the sake of taking a look at the divine beauty on Azure Divine Mountain. He had lingered around the mountain and been unwilling to leave, yet he had ultimately failed to catch a single glimpse of the beautiful lady. Not only that, but he had almost let slip the opportunity to step up into the position of sect leader. In fact, the previous sect leader had sent a messenger flying sword through the continents, asking his Ascension tier good friend in the Middle Earth Divine Continent to forcefully frag Sun Yuan out from the Bamboo Sea Small World. It was said that after Sun Yuan returned to the Jade Tablet sect, the old sect leader whose mind and body were withered like decaying wood, and who was imminently about to pass away still, forcefully summoned the last of his energy to viciously scold his disciple, becoming so furious that he directly threw the sect leader's token from the ancestral hall to the ground. Of course, these were all unverified rumors that became increasingly dramatized as they were spread further and further. After all, only a few old ancestors who had already extracted themselves from worldly affairs for many years had been present along with the old sect leader and Sun Yuan at the time. Even so, the old cultivators of the Jade Tablet sect still recounted this matter to their disciples as an interesting story. However, taking into account the fact that the master and disciple were birds of a feather, Zhang Shangzhen felt like the rumors were most likely true. Perhaps one of the reasons why the old sect leader had become so furious with Sun Yuan was because he had surprisingly failed to catch a single glimpse of the divine beauty on Azure Divine Mountain. Zhang Shangzhen stopped pretending to make seals with his hands, clasping them behind his back as he walked forward and recalled some secrets that only circulated between a few people at the peak of the mountains. He couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Looking around at the breathtaking scenery here again, he couldn't help but feel heartache for those immortal big sisters. Sect leader Sun Yuan had once said that the fated opportunities linked to the 8 murals of the female heavenly officials were a critical reason why the Flax Robe sect had chosen Skeleton Shoal as the founding location for their sect. Perhaps they had planned to establish their sect at the southernmost region of the continent right from the very beginning, and their so-called explanation of being at odds with the sword immortals of the complete Reed continent and being forced to venture south was nothing more than a convenient excuse. Perhaps this was an excuse to cover up their true reason for choosing Skeleton Shoal. Sun Yuan had gone through many secret documents passed down through the generations by the top-notch immortal sects and forces in the Middle Earth Divine Continent, and he had especially gone through many records of the ancient clan that looked after the Confucian sect's etiquette. From this, Sun Yuan speculated that the 8 female heavenly officials from the heavenly court were equivalent in status to palace stewards from the censorate or 6 ministries in the imperial courts of mortal empires. These female heavenly officials were likely responsible for patrolling heaven and earth and supervising thunder deities, wind lords, rain gods, and other similar beings in the ancient heavenly court, preventing any faction from abusing their power and acting wantonly. As such, the 8 female heavenly officials who had been sealed in the murals by some powerful ancient cultivator had once occupied low-ranking positions, but assumed huge responsibilities in the ancient heavenly court. They couldn't be underestimated. Following the collapse of the heavenly court and the crumbling of the divine Tao, the virtuous sages of the past had established a new order where heaven and earth were isolated from each other. Almost all of the ancient deities with extraordinary innate mystical powers who had been fortunate enough to survive the calamity had been exiled and imprisoned at a few mountain tops that no one knew about. They could atone for their sins through meritorious acts, which entailed helping the mortal world balance wind and rain and water and fire. It was rumored that people could directly communicate with some primordial deities in a great hall at True Marshall Mountain, an ancestral temple of the Militarian sect, or at the ancestral hall of the Wind Snow Temple. In fact, the scholarly temples of the Confucian sect didn't prohibit this behavior. In stark contrast, this special treatment wasn't afforded to the Divine Edict sect, the #1 sect in the Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, or the Cloud Forest Zhang clan, a clan that had produced many grand priests in the past. Jiang Shangzhen shook his sleeves. The abundance of spiritual energy here was astounding, so much so that it was as if he were walking on a small path through the mountain forest after a bout of rain. There were beads of water on his clothes, and Jiang Shangzhen thought to himself that those below the ascension tier, including himself, could receive huge benefits if they were able to stay here and cultivate. As for those at the ascension tier, the richness or paucity of spiritual energy was no longer the most important consideration for where one cultivated. Jiang Shangzhen raised an arm and sniffed his sleeve, remarking, "What a refreshing smell. This probably carries the fragrance of those immortal big sisters." He looked up with a smile, gazing at a distant residence that had a golden plaque with blurry characters. The spiritual energy near the residence was especially rich, and immortal mist lingered around the waist of a divine maiden standing at the entrance, undulating slightly as it did so. There was an inkstone flash hanging by her waist, and it was vaguely visible from a distance. There was another divine maiden sitting on the roof and gently twirling her fingers, causing a small and adorable auspicious cloud to rapidly fly around like a snow-white sparrow. She peered down at Jiang Shangzhen with a hint of a smile. The hanging inkstone divine maiden smiled coldly and said, "How impudent. You dare to travel far away to this place with your soul simply because you're at the unpolished jade tier." The Rainbringer divine maiden sitting on the roof smiled faintly and said, "No wonder you were able to deceive everyone and secretly breach the Flax Robe Sect's mountain and water formation as well as our immortal palace restriction." Jiang Shangzhen bowed and said, "It's been many years, Big Sister Hanging Inkstone and Big Sister Rainbringer, but Jiang Shangzhen is finally able to meet the two of you again. This is truly a great fortune and a blessing from my ancestors." Arcs of purple lightning crackled near the hanging inkstone divine maiden's sleeves, and it was clear that the mere words of this glib person, despite his heart actually being as calm as still water, were enough to make her feel displeased. "We once reached an agreement with the Flax Robe sect that we wouldn't observe the matters outside of Mural City. So, has your physical body gone to look for our big sister?" the Rainbringer divine maiden asked. As the two parties conversed, a 7-colored deer jumped across the roof ridges in the distance, appearing nimble and ethereal as it moved. Jiang Shangzhen nodded and focused his gaze on the 7-colored deer, asking in curiosity, "In the past, I heard about Celestial Maiden He Xiaoyang from the Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's Divine Edict sect possessing unparalleled fortune in the continent. She's even established a sect in the complete Reed continent now, and she's still accompanied by a divine deer as always. I do wonder, is there any relationship between her deer and the deer here? Make haste and leave the immortal palace, common person," the hanging inkstone divine maiden commanded in slight impatience. Jiang Shangzhen's expression was solemn as he replied seriously, "Please feel free to hit me or scold me if you find me annoying, big sisters. I definitely won't fight back. If cultivators from the Flax Robe sect come to drag me out, however, I do have some pride and backbone even though I don't have any impressive abilities. I'll refuse to leave no matter what." Ferocious arcs of lightning instantly thundered into existence around the hanging inkstone divine maiden, causing her ribbons to flutter in the air, and making her immortal dress appear like a dress of purple lightning. It was clear that there was no need for the old ancestors of the Flax Robe sect to offer incense and knock on the door to enter this realm. As per the agreement that said no one was allowed to enter this realm to disturb their peaceful cultivation, the hanging inkstone divine maiden was already planning to deal with Jiang Shangzhen by herself. However, the lithe Rainbringer divine maiden with a cloud bun hairstyle slowly stood up and gracefully descended by the hanging inkstone divine maiden's side, saying softly, "Let's wait for Big Sister to return first." The hanging inkstone divine maiden was nowhere near as graceful and restrained as the Rainbringer divine maiden, and she was quite reluctant to hold back at this moment. She still wanted to teach this glib lecher a lesson. What did it matter that he was an unpolished jade tier cultivator? His own soul had come by itself, and this was their immortal palace after all. As such, his combat power was at most at the nascent tier. To say nothing of the fact that two of them were present, just she alone would be enough to comfortably kick him out of this realm. However, the Rainbringer divine maiden gently tugged her sleeve, and only then did the hanging inkstone divine maiden hold her tongue and relent. The purple lightning around her slowly flowed into the small inkstone hanging by her waist. 3 knocks sounded outside the mural. Yet these knocks reverberated through heaven and earth like the thundering drums of deities in the immortal palace mystical realm. The Rainbringer divine maiden looked up and said softly, "It's been a while, esteemed immortal Guoqi." Jiang Shangzhen turned around and looked up. A huge pair of embroidered shoes broke through the sea of clouds, yet the esteemed immortal had already returned to a normal size by the time she landed on the ground. This was an ordinary-looking woman who wasn't very tall. However, her aura was overwhelming, and there was a Dao saber by her hip with its hilt having the decoration of a dragon jewel. As powerful as Jiang Shangzhen was, even he couldn't help but feel a slight headache. This woman wasn't attractive, and her temper was truly very bad. In fact, he had suffered at her hands in the past. They had both been Golden Core tier Earth immortals at the time, and Guoqi had believed some of the rumors about him and thus traversed across countless mountains and waters to hunt him for almost half a year. They had clashed thrice during this time, and Jiang Shangzhen hadn't felt comfortable about going all out against Guoqi. She was a female after all, and her status was also very special. She was the only daughter of the Flax Robe sect's previous sect leader, and Jiang Shangzhen hadn't wanted his journey home to be blocked by a mentally challenged person. As such, there was the rare case of Jiang Shangzhen suffering again and again in the northern complete reed continent. Esteemed immortal Guoqi was now the sect leader of the Flax Robe sect already, and she had finally stumbled her way to the unpolished jade tier after much struggle. The future of her great Dao didn't look too bright, but there was nothing that could be done about this since the Flax Robe sect seldom focused on one's cultivation base when choosing the new sect leader. More often than not, it was the person with the strongest temper and the most courage to make personal sacrifices who got chosen as sect leader. As such, a big reason why Jiang Shangzhen was unwilling to linger around during this trip to Skeleton Shoal with Qian Ping'an was because of esteemed immortal Guoqi, someone whom he had nicknamed Shorty Tigress back then. However, there were some small surprises, and Jiang Shangzhen would have expected Guoqi to be doing battle at malicious Ghost Valley. If that were the case and the unpolished jade tier cultivator from the ancestral hall of the Flax Robe sect had come instead, then Jiang Shangzhen wouldn't have been worried at all. Casting one's gaze over the entire majestic world, Jiang Shangzhen didn't regard himself as top-notch when it came to combat power and fighting ability. Even though he had made a huge name for himself in the Parasol Leaf continent, which was no smaller than the northern complete reed continent, earning the praises slaying earth immortals with a single willow leaf, and rather become enemies with the Jade Tablet sect than Jiang Shangzhen, he never took these matters seriously. When it came to the ability to flee, however, Jiang Shangzhen truly wasn't blowing his own trumpet when he felt sincerely that he was quite talented and capable. Many years ago, an old ancestor of his sect had joined forces with some traders in his cloud cave, Blessed Land, to set up a certain death trap for him. However, Jiang Shangzhen had still managed to flee, and it wasn't long before the Jade Tablet sect and the Cloud Cave Blessed Land had suffered bloody massacres. Sun Yuan had watched from the sidelines, witnessing the brutal scenes playing out in the Cloud Cave Blessed Land owned by the Jiang clan. Along with his subordinates, Jiang Shangzhen had directly slaughtered all of the Earth Immortals and middle 5-tier cultivators with the potential to become Earth Immortals in the Blessed Land. His blade had reached every corner of the Blessed Land, and he had risked huge losses to the Jiang clan to resolutely execute all of the traitors and potential threats. One had to realize that Jiang Shangzhen had a catchphrase that was well renowned throughout the Parasol Leaf continent. The romance between men and women should be long-lasting, but enmity from last night is like leftovers from last night. It doesn't taste good. Even if I eat shit, I'll definitely eat shit that's still warm. Guoqi placed her hand on the hilt of her saber and stared intently at the esteemed guest, who had traveled here from far away, saying with a smile, "You've walked into this trap yourself, so don't blame me for confining you here and beating you up." Jiang Shangzhen blinked as if he didn't recognize esteemed immortal Guoqi. After a brief moment, however, he put on an expression of realization and asked, "Are you Quaner? How have you become so beautiful? When you advance to the immortal tier someday in the future, you don't need to make any big changes and only need to make some slight adjustments to your appearance. At that time, Quaner's beauty will make my eyes pop out of their sockets." Guoqi narrowed her eyes, keeping one hand on the hilt of her saber and gesturing with her other hand as she said with a fake smile, "I'll let you say a few more final words. Jiang Shangzhen was in a trance as he stared at Guoqi, and he murmured, "Sure enough, Quanner is indeed different from those basic women who have nothing but skin and makeup. Speaking honestly from the bottom of my heart, Quanner can't be regarded as the most beautiful woman in the world. Even so, you're still the same as before, and men will find it extremely difficult to forget your appearance after taking a single glance at you." Guoqi chuckled and replied, Your words sound very familiar. Do you still remember Gao Lu from the Lightning Marsh sect? She was one of the most beautiful women from the central region of the northern complete reed continent at the time, yet she still doesn't have a Dao partner right now. She once mentioned your name to me in private, and these words of yours were deeply imprinted in her mind. It's been so many years already, yet she still hasn't forgotten your words. Jiang Shangzhen, your cultivation base has risen quite a bit after all these years, so why hasn't your glib tongue improved at all? I'm truly very disappointed. Jiang Shangzhen was unfazed as he smiled faintly and replied, "This is indeed my bad. I've been completely focused on cultivation for the past few years, so I've somewhat let the more important things fall by the wayside. Quanner, your feelings toward me are much more sincere, so I'll definitely work even harder for you in the future." The Hanging Inkstone Divine Maiden sniggered and remarked, "How has someone survived until today? You can step forward and support esteemed immortal Guoqi in a moment." "I won't stop you," the Rainbringer Divine Maiden said. Jiang Shangzhen looked around and mused, It's truly as if I'm dying for love amid the peony flowers." The Rainbringer Divine Maiden's expression suddenly became serious. She focused her attention and paused her breathing, fixing her gaze on some certain place. It was as if the Hanging Inkstone Divine Maiden were facing a huge enemy, and she gestured for the flax-robed sect's esteemed immortal Guoqi to wait for a short moment. A young woman from Lion Peak stood under the mural of a female heavenly official, reaching forward with a hand and asking calmly with her mind's voice, "You're still not going to come out?" The Hanging Inkstone Divine Maiden's heart jolted at almost the exact same moment, and she looked toward someplace else where a man had traveled from a faraway place and arrived at the northern complete reed continent. This man was looking up at her right now, and his expression appeared exhausted. However, as if sensing her presence, he smiled knowingly at the female heavenly official in the mural and said, "After dreaming of you every night yet not being able to see you, I've finally found you now." Meanwhile, the Deer Rider Divine Maiden was walking side by side with Jiang Shangzhen's true body near the River God Temple along the banks of the swaying river. The flowing iridescent boat rapidly descended in front of them, following which a female sect leader walked out. After the Deer Rider Divine Maiden saw her, it was as if the impurity in her mind was immediately wiped away. Even though she didn't understand why, she was extremely certain that this young Taoist nun with a majestic aura was the master whom she should truly serve. Standing on the bank of the swaying river, the stunningly beautiful young Taoist nun looked at Jiang Shangzhen and asked with a frown, "Are you his Tao guardian?" This was a very sudden and unexpected question. However, Jiang Shangzhen instantly understood the situation. Some results and truths might be unclear, with the path to them twisting and turning, but this didn't actually inhibit anything. Jiang Shangzhen laughed loudly and replied, No, I wouldn't dare to." However, the Deer Rider Divine Maiden immediately contradicted him, saying something that was rife with killing intent. His words carried hidden meaning just then, and he was still trying to persuade me to serve that young wanderer. He has ill intentions and ulterior motives, and he almost killed off the fate between master and me. Jiang Shangzhen rubbed his chin and said in a pitiful voice, "It appears that I'm not very welcome in the northern complete reed continent. I guess it's time for me to flee." The Deer Rider Divine Maiden's expression suddenly became distant, and she said in a quiet voice, "Master, it seems like my two sisters have come across their fated opportunities as well. Who would have thought that we'd each be going our own way in the span of a single day?" The young Taoist nun who was the esteemed leader of a sect didn't pay too much attention to this. She was slightly travel-worn after rushing to this place, and she furrowed her brows as she battled against a rare moment of indecision. It was only at this moment that Jiang Shangzhen started to feel surprised. This was because the Taoist nun, whom he had already guessed the identity of, had developed killing intent. When it came to the romance between couples in the mountains, getting beaten was an expression of care, and getting scolded was an expression of love. Jiang Shangzhen truly couldn't be any more familiar with this. Being willing to develop killing intent was a sign of deep-rooted love. This was a feeling of love that was almost impossible to escape even after the fated encounter was over. The young Taoist nun ignored Zhang Shangzhen, instead smiling at the dear rider divine maiden and saying, "Let's make a trip to malicious Ghost Valley's Skeleton Wall City. Master has only just advanced to the unpolished Jade tier, so it might not be appropriate for Master to go there before stabilizing your cultivation base," the dear rider divine maiden suggested in a soft voice. The young Taoist nun shook her head and replied, "It's okay. This is only a minor matter." She had major matters to settle. There was a row of huge archway buildings at the entrance of malicious Ghost Valley, and the archway at the very front had 5 entrances and was made to the most extravagant standard. The archway walls were carved from precious yellow and green-colored glaze, while each dragon pillar was engraved with the demon-subduing scenes of each sect leader in the history of the Flax Robe sect. The plaque above the middle entrance read, "Magnificent aura witnessing wonders." Qi refiners and pure martial artists often had incredible eyesight, yet Chen Ping'an hadn't managed to see the end of the path when looking at the row of archways before. Moreover, this seemingly wasn't because of illusion techniques. Compared to the gate linking Stalactite Mountain to the Sword Qi Great Wall, however, the mystical nature of these archways didn't astonish Chen Ping'an very much. Chen Ping'an casually sat down near the archways and read for more than 2 hours. He read very carefully, unwilling to let slip any detail, so he only managed to make it less than halfway through the book. He decided to rest at a nearby inn located in the market for the night, and he would make further plans tomorrow. There was no rush to make a decision, and he would either look at the scenery on the border of malicious Ghost Valley again, or he would enter the depths of the valley through the row of archways and train inside. Chen Ping'an put the book away and walked toward the bustling marketplace, an area that the Flax Robe sect had loaned to a cultivator from a small force in Skeleton Shoal to manage. This was the case for many of the Flax Robe sect's assets, with the cultivators of the sect not personally participating in the management. The sect had fewer than 200 cultivators but a huge number of assets and businesses, after all, so personally managing everything would naturally delay one's cultivation of the Great Tao. The loss outweighed the gain. There were exceptions to this, of course, and the intercontinental ship managed by the nascent tier cultivator with the surname Su and Mural City patrolled by the Golden Core tier cultivator with the surname Yang were notable examples. This was because these 2 matters pertained to the face and foundation of the Flax Robe sect. Downtrodden Mountain was already showing signs of becoming a prosperous mountain with many large residences now. So Julien and Shiro were responsible for dealing with internal and external matters, respectively. The former managed the general affairs in the mountain, while the latter managed the businesses in Dragon Riding Alley. Only when Chen Ping'an truly left Dragon Spring Prefecture did he look back and consider matters as he took the occasional break from practicing fist techniques on the intercontinental ship, and it was only at that moment that he realized the interesting nature of the situation. Julien and Shiro were like his stewards, yet one was a far-roaming tier martial artist, while the other was a female bone ghost in the immortal body of Du Mao. Who could imagine this? Chen Ping'an had already given Julien a heads-up before leaving Downtrodden Mountain, saying that he generally wouldn't send any messenger flying swords back to Oxhorn Mountain unless there was something important. In any case, the 2 flying swords kept inside his small sword resting ground couldn't travel across continents anyway, so he was genuinely traveling alone to the northern complete reed continent this time. He had no companions and no attachments. However, Chen Ping'an wasn't worried because Downtrodden Mountain was now very peaceful and stable after all. In fact, it was other people who needed to be apprehensive of him. Chen Ping'an adjusted his bamboo hat as he walked forward, smiling to himself as he thought that it was probably time for him to become a wandering merchant and make some money as well. Skeleton Shoal was a place where people didn't need to adhere to the rules and etiquette of the Confucian sect. The small market had no name, but the locals all referred to it as Helpless Pass. As time went on, those who traveled to and fro all recognized this market. Even though the sun was high up and blazing, the streets and alleys of the market still appeared as dark and eerie as always. According to the Be at Ease compilation published by the Flax Robe sect, this was due to the energy of malicious Ghost Valley seeping outside. As such, those who had a weak physique were advised against approaching this area. However, as frightening as the energy appeared, The Be at Ease compilation very clearly stated that this energy had already been refined by the mountain and water formation of the flax robe sect. It was relatively pure and uniform now, and it was, to a degree, suitable for cultivators to directly absorb. Thus, if a chi refiner were to ride on the wind and soar into the sky, casting their gaze over the area, they would discover that there was much more than just a market. There were many chi refiners cultivating in thatched cottages along the borders of malicious Ghost Valley, with their simple but elegant dwellings dotting the region like evenly scattered stars in the sky. These thatched cottages were purposely constructed on so-called springs of rich yin energy, with these locations being determined by cultivators of the flax robe sect skilled at feng shui and geomancy. Each thatched cottage had a straw mat made by the 3 official attendant temple, using secret techniques. Cultivators could rent these thatched cottages for short periods of time, or those with great wealth could alternatively purchase them outright. The Be at Ease compilation included the detailed price of each thatched cottage, listing everything up front and in a clear manner. This was probably the flax robe sect's avenue to making money. Downtrodden Mountain needed to take good note of this in the future. Qian Ping'an casually wandered around after entering the market, and he discovered that almost all of the shops were selling a type of white bone that was as crystalline as jade. This was a type of connate spiritual treasure that the Be at Ease compilation introduced in great detail. These white bones were extremely precious, and their formation was due to past cultivators of the flax robe sect making huge sacrifices to shoo ghosts and yin entities that had been born on the ancient battlefields to malicious Ghost Valley, lest they wantonly bring calamity to the entire skeleton shoal. More than half of the ghosts and yin entities in malicious Ghost Valley had been forced there by these cultivators. Afterward, some of these ghosts and yin entities had advanced in cultivation in a manner similar to chi refiners. After encountering all kinds of coincidences and fated opportunities, some of them had transformed into heroic spirits similar to the deities of the mountains and waters. However, the large majority of them had devolved into violent and unrestrained malicious ghosts. And with the passing of time, powerful yin entities that especially devoured other ghosts had appeared. There were countless conflicts and deadly battles, with the losers having their souls obliterated and transformed into the yin energy of malicious Ghost Valley. The losers would also lose the opportunity to reincarnate, and their pile of white bones of varying grades would be scattered all over the place. The victors would often take these bones as their spoils of battle, storing them at their bases in malicious Ghost Valley. As chi refiners and pure martial artists entered malicious Ghost Valley over the years, these pure white and jade-like bones gradually became precious and prized souvenirs. Many merchants from the mountains came here to purchase bones from malicious Ghost Valley that had been tempered to an incredibly pure state by yin energy, as this was a top-notch material for crafting and refining all kinds of ghostly immortal tools. In the end, Qian Ping'an walked into one of the largest shops in the market. It was packed to the brim with travelers, and everyone was looking at the most prized possession of the shop, a skeleton that was sealed inside a colored glazed display cabinet. This was the skeleton of a city lord's yin spirit, with this city lord having once overseen a now destroyed city of malicious Ghost Valley. The skeleton measured 3 meters in height, and the shop had purposely placed it in a sitting position in the colored glazed display cabinet, with its hands clenched into fists and resting on its knees. The skeleton was gazing into the distance, and it appeared haughty and domineering even though it was already devoid of life. Naturally occurring silver threads ran through the entire skeleton, interweaving with each other and creating a shimmer. It was said that preceding his demise, this person had been a heroic spirit whose cultivation base had been equivalent to the nascent tier. He had been an unruly and violently tempered individual, and had commanded an army of 8,000 yin entities and declared himself a king, often engaging in conflict with the joint owner of malicious Ghost Valley, an unpolished jade tier cultivator. However, the Be at Ease compilation didn't have any records explaining this heroic spirit's death. According to the young shop attendant whose spittle was now flying everywhere, the owner of this shop had become acquainted with a sword immortal from the north in the past, and this sword immortal had purposely concealed his strength and presented himself as an abode tier cultivator. The shopkeeper had gotten along very well with the sword immortal, treating him with respect and courtesy. In the end, the sword immortal had made a trip through malicious Ghost Valley, bringing with him this immensely valuable skeleton when he came back out. He had directly gifted the skeleton to the shop, saying that this was repayment for the wine money that he owed. Afterward, he had left without leaving behind his true name. Qian Ping'an definitely wouldn't believe a single word of such a preposterous story if it were told at any other place. However, this was the northern complete reed continent, so Qian Ping'an was half trusting and half in doubt. The skeleton of the city lord's heroic spirit was much like the golden branch and jade leaves of an earth immortal, something that could undoubtedly be classified as a high-grade immortal treasure. The shop attendant explained that this skeleton wasn't necessarily for sale, but if someone were truly sincere, there was indeed room for negotiation. In saying this, the shop attendant made it very clear that one shouldn't even raise this matter if they didn't have at least 40 to 50 grain coins in their pockets, lest both parties end up wasting their time and breath. Despite this sky-high asking price, Qian Ping'an discovered that there were still a few groups of people in the shop expressing strong interest and eagerness. Qian Ping'an didn't participate in this. He found an inn to stay at after leaving the shop, and his room couldn't be described as extravagant, but it was at least relatively clean and tidy. Similar to the tea shop at the ferry station of Feng River, this place didn't accept mortal gold and silver either. Prices started at 1 snowflake coin, and this would buy someone a room for 3 days, excluding food and wine. If someone dared to charge so much for a room seemingly as big as a snail shell in the mortal empires outside the mountains, they would definitely drown to death under the weight of everyone's condescending spit, even if it were the capital of the Great Li Empire, which was brimming with wealthy merchants. That was more than 300 taels of silver a night, after all. Qian Ping'an took off his bamboo hat and unstrapped Sword Immortal from his back, continuing to read the Be at Ease compilation, which made him feel more and more uneasy. Skeleton Shoal was one of the 10 major ancient battlefields in the northern complete reed continent, and Malicious Ghost Valley was even more unique in the sense that it existed in a time vortex which formed a small world of its own. It was like a ghostly world that was no smaller than Skeleton Shoal in the living world. A paramount heroic spirit, now at a cultivation base equivalent to the unpolished jade tier, had been the first to rise up, with many heeding his call as he built an army of tens of thousands of Yin generals and Yin soldiers. He had constructed the extremely famous Skeleton Wall City, and like the capital of an empire, this city was surrounded by dozens of other cities of varying sizes. Half of these cities were subordinate to Skeleton Wall City, while the remaining half of the cities were established and ruled by other powerful ghosts and Yin entities. These latter cities opposed Skeleton Wall City from a distance, not willing to subject themselves to the rule of someone else. They joined forces to rival Skeleton Wall City, and after 1,000 years, the number of ghosts and Yin entities in Malicious Ghost Valley grew fewer and fewer. However, they also became increasingly powerful. There were 2 times in history when the ghosts and Yin entities of Malicious Ghost Valley had attempted to brazenly break through the barrier and raid Skeleton Shoal, and they had even yearned to travel north along the Swang River and directly conquer 2 nations in a single go. Afterward, they had planned to kidnap living people and drag them back into Malicious Ghost Valley, using sinister secret techniques to refine these people into ghosts and Yin entities, allowing them to grow their army. These terrifying attempts had fortunately been stopped by the Flax Robe sect, yet they had also caused the Flax Robe sect to suffer severe losses both times, with their power and fame plummeting from great heights to shocking lows. From establishing themselves to expanding their territory in the northern complete reed continent, it could be said that nothing was going smoothly for the Flax Robe sect. However, this was also a reflection of the northern complete reed continent's incredible foundations. Just Skeleton Shoal's Flax Robe sect alone already had 3 unpolished jade tier old ancestors. At the same time, Malicious Ghost Valley also had the equivalent of an unpolished jade tier cultivator of their own. On the other hand, disregarding the small group of mighty figures and hidden elites who had secretly infiltrated the eastern treasured vile continent, the continent only had very few locally produced upper 5-tier cultivators standing at the peak of the mountains. Cui Dongshan had commented on this matter before, saying that the eastern treasured vile continent was less than 30% of the size of the northern complete reed continent. The eastern treasured vile continent indeed produced very few unpolished jade tier cultivators, and it couldn't compare to the fame or might of the other continents. However, cultivators of the eastern treasured vile continent, who advanced to the upper 5 tiers, were all incredibly capable people. For example, there were outstanding prodigies such as Bamboo Scroll Lake's Lu Laoqing, and the Wind Snow Temple's Wei Jin. They were both strange entities who possessed a small portion of the continent's fortune. If Lu Laocheng and Wei Jin were to engage in life-and-death battles with cultivators at the same cultivation base from the northern complete reed continent or the parasol leaf continent, they would enjoy an extremely big chance at victory, especially against the official immortals who lived a pampered life of money and comfort. When cultivators chose to enter malicious Ghost Valley to train, they were essentially signing a life-and-death contract with the Flax Robe sect. It was completely up to their own abilities and fortune whether they obtained riches or lost their life. If it were the former, the Flax Robe sect wouldn't feel jealous and wouldn't covet their wealth. They wouldn't ask for a single copper coin. If it were the latter, the victims would have no one to blame when they were deprived of the right to leave and reincarnate. This was an unwritten rule. But there had indeed been immortal forces who had felt aggrieved and reluctant to accept the premature deaths of their prized disciples in the past. As such, they had gathered friends and allies together to boldly march to Skeleton Shoal, debating the matter with the Flax Robe sect. They were both condemning the Flax Robe sect and insinuating the need for compensation from the sect. The Flax Robe sect never offered a single word of explanation, and they would simply place a table outside the sect entrance if anyone came for the sake of condemning them for these matters. They would offer their visitors a cup of gloomy tea, after which they would be prepared to fight. Either the visitors fight their way to the Flax Robe sect's ancestral hall, or the visitors would be beaten up until they had to hand over all of their immortal treasures and immortal coins. They would then be tossed into the swaying river, forced to swim back to their immortal forces in the north. Because of this, the swaying river was also known as the Dumpling River. Many dumplings had been cooked in this river before. Of course, the Flax Robe sect didn't wish death upon the cultivators who entered malicious Ghost Valley to cultivate either. The Be at Ease compilation clearly marked out 3 routes toward the north, recommending chi refiners and martial artists to carefully consider their own strength. They should start by searching for lone wandering ghosts first, after which they should at most interact with the cities of small scale and low strength. Finally, those who were powerful, bold, and still wanting more could try their luck at the few cities in the core region of malicious Ghost Valley. The Be at Ease compilation had clear records of all the Earth Immortal level heroic spirits and ghost kings in malicious Ghost Valley, detailing their cultivation base, the immortal techniques they were skilled at, the immortal treasures they possessed, and the trump cards they had up their sleeves. Moreover, cultivators from the Flax Robe sect had also built 2 small towns inside malicious Ghost Valley, with sect leader Guaqi personally guarding one of them. Normal people often wouldn't be able to see her, but there were 2 groups of cultivators from the Flax Robe sect who outsiders could follow or enlist the help of. These cultivators specialized in hunting in spirits and ghost generals, and they didn't charge a single copper coin for their help. However, the Be at Ease compilation frankly stated that the cultivators of the Flax Robe sect wouldn't act as the personal bodyguard or subordinate of anyone. As such, it was very normal for them to stand by idly, providing no help at all as they watched others die. If there were disciples of powerful immortal forces and clans who had too much money to spend and came to malicious Ghost Valley to sightsee, the Flax Robe sect was fine with this too. However, these individuals had to follow the instructions of the cultivators from the Flax Robe sect, and the sect could then guarantee them a safe journey through malicious Ghost Valley. As long as these individuals abided by the rules as they traveled through the valley, the cultivators of the Flax Robe sect would offer compensation if any unexpected loss were to occur. They would compensate with not only money but even with their lives. Night fell and Chan Ping'an closed the thick Be at Ease compilation. He stood up and walked to the window, leaning against the windowsill as he drank wine. After reading the entire book, Chan Ping'an remembered the long and complicated list of rules and taboos. At the same time, he also felt the pride and boldness of the cultivators from the Flax Robe sect. Thinking back to the past, a young boy wearing straw sandals in the Jewel's small world had craned his neck and looked up, witnessing a scene that he would never forget. Countless sword cultivators and immortals had traveled across the continents on their swords, heading to the Sword Chi Great Wall to battle against the demon tribe. Were they seeking riches or seeking fame? They were seeking neither, and they were simply looking to sharpen their blades. It was no wonder she had said that this impoverished place had historically produced many outstanding individuals. Only places could produce the largest number of sword immortals in the majestic world. If someone received a few pots of wine, then they would be willing to repay the favor by giving away the skeleton of a heroic spirit, worth dozens of grain rain coins. Was this reasonable? No. Was this unreasonable? Definitely not. Qian Ping'an turned his head and looked at Sword Immortal on the table, saying softly, "Rest assured, I definitely won't embarrass you in this place." Qian Ping'an shifted his gaze slightly, looking at his bamboo hat and continuing with a faint smile, "Because my name is Qian Ping'an, Ping'an as in safety. I'm a swordsman." After pausing for a moment, Qian Ping'an rubbed his chin and murmured, "Will I sound more impressive and formidable if I don't say Ping'an as in safety?" Mural City was facing a strange situation not experienced in more than 100 years. The cultivators of the Flax Robe sect started to seal off the 3 murals that still contained the fated opportunities, prohibiting all visitors from approaching them. Not only that, but even the shopkeepers and shop attendants in the surrounding businesses needed to temporarily relocate until further notice from the Flax Robe sect. This naturally caused significant anger and displeasure among everyone, with curses and abuse ringing out from time to time. There was one very unlucky person, and there was coincidentally a cultivator from the Flax Robe sect passing by as he stomped his foot and loudly cursed the sect. Hearing this, the cultivator strode over and knocked him down without saying a single word, causing him to immediately faint. Afterward, the pitiful man's friends also didn't say a single word as they picked him up and fled. They didn't apologize to the cultivator from the Flax Robe sect, nor did they shout any empty threats. This was the nature of the northern complete reed continent. People had the guts to point at others and curse them to their face, but they were also willing to concede their lack of ability if they were knocked down and beaten up afterward. They would seek vengeance when they became more powerful one day. The Golden Core Tier cultivator with the surname Yang was experiencing a slight headache at this moment. Beside him, his junior brother, Pang Lanshi, felt even more helpless. As it turned out, there was a disheveled young man kneeling in front of one of the murals and kowtowing non-stop. Blood flowed from his forehead as he pleaded with the Rain-bringer Divine Maiden for a fated opportunity, saying that there was a matter that he definitely needed to exact revenge for. If the Divine Maiden were willing to bestow upon him a fated opportunity of the Great Tao, then he would be willing to serve her forever, in this life and in his subsequent lives. In fact, after he carried out his revenge, he was even willing to be pulverized to death if that was what the Divine Maiden wanted. Before kneeling down and kowtowing, the young man had retrieved an ancient jade tablet, which he had obtained from some unknown place, and gently placed it on the ground. The Golden Core Tier cultivator waved his hand, signaling to an external disciple that there was no need to shoo this person away. Pang Lanshi wanted to say something in persuasion, but his shoulder was also held down by the palm of the Golden Core Tier cultivator. More of the middle-aged Golden Core Tier cultivator's attention was focused on the woman who was as slender as a willow leaf. The mountain and water formations that the Flax Robe sect had set up near the murals didn't react at all, but the natural restrictions of the Immortal Palace mystical realm immediately started to ripple. As for the situation over at the Hanging Inkstone Divine Maiden's location, she surprisingly wasn't flustered or in a hurry. An outsider had already received her acknowledgement and approval, and the Flax Robe sect was happy to accept this and let the outsider go. The sect wouldn't prevent these people from leaving. The Hanging Inkstone Divine Maiden also repaid this favor, climbing the mountain on foot and heading to the ancestral hall of the Flax Robe sect with her new master. Her corresponding mural was the first of the 3 murals to become a line drawing. Afterward, a 7-colored deer leaped out from the mural of the Deer Rider Divine Maiden, vanishing in an instant. This mural quickly turned into a line drawing as well, the second for the day. The Golden Core Tier cultivator had been completely stunned just then. After all, the fated opportunity linked to the mural of the Deer Rider Divine Maiden was the only one that the Flax Robe sect was determined to obtain. From the top to the bottom, everyone in the sect hoped dearly that their junior brother, Pang Lanshi, could smoothly obtain this fated opportunity of the Great Tao. Thus the Golden Core Tier cultivator had almost been unable to stop himself from stepping forward and attempting to prevent the 7-colored deer from galloping away. However, sect leader Guoqi had quickly walked out of the mural and instructed him to stand back, telling him to guard the final mural instead. Afterward, sect leader Guoqi had returned to Malicious Ghost Valley, saying that there was an esteemed guest whom she needed to personally receive. As for the hanging inkstone divine maiden and her new master climbing the mountain to visit the ancestral hall, she could only leave this matter to the other elders in the ancestral hall to deal with. The golden courtier cultivator was feeling very confused right now. Who was important enough for the sect leader to personally receive? Perhaps it was the sect leader of a large sect? The Rainbringer divine maiden finally appeared, surprisingly looking as pale as a sheet as she walked out from the mural. She glanced at the young woman who had a cold expression before glancing at the ancient jade tablet that was inscribed with the seal script characters drifting clouds and flowing water on the front and back. The female heavenly official, who was extremely skilled at divination, seemingly fell into a state of indecision. The golden courtier cultivator noticed some clues. This was a huge dilemma that none of the 7 other divine maidens of Mural City had faced. The divine maiden looked extremely delicate and gentle, and if one weren't coincidentally standing in front of the mural and didn't pay attention to her eyes, then one would very likely fail to notice her current state. Indeed, even the golden courtier cultivator wouldn't have noticed anything out of the ordinary. It was inconceivable to see a female heavenly official appear so pitiful and helpless. The Rainbringer divine maiden was the divine maiden with whom the Flax Robe sect had communicated the most, and it was said that she was the wisest and most resourceful out of the 8 heavenly officials in the Immortal Palace mystical realm. She was especially skilled at Go, and the old ancestor of the Flax Robe sect had once smiled and remarked that the Rainbringer divine maiden wasn't necessarily the strongest or the best at fighting. If one were fortunate enough to receive her favor, however, she would definitely provide invaluable help to one's immortal force. The young woman with the cold expression shot a glance at the young man who was still kowtowing despite his skull already showing through his forehead. She then looked at the Rainbringer divine maiden and said, "You can help him deal with his hardships first. You can then come to me after 60 years to ask for forgiveness." The Rainbringer divine maiden's heart swayed with indecision, so much so that the entire Mural City started to appear misty. Looking at the woman who clearly didn't possess a very high cultivation base, the Rainbringer divine maiden felt as if she were a petty official from outside the mountains looking at a paramount official from the Ministry of Personnel. "How should I find Master at that time?" the Rainbringer divine maiden asked in a quivering voice. "Lion Peak," the young woman replied apathetically. The golden courtier cultivator from the Flax Robe sect furrowed his brows. Lion Peak indeed had a powerful nascent tier cultivator, who couldn't be underestimated. However, that was a male cultivator who could no longer be regarded as young. But even if the nascent tier cultivator of Lion Peak stood here, how could he possibly make the Rainbringer divine maiden tremble with fear and apprehension? The young woman smiled faintly at the golden courtier cultivator and introduced herself, saying, "I'm Li Lu from Lion Peak." The middle-aged golden courtier cultivator had never heard this name before, but he still acknowledged the young woman and replied, "I'm Yong Lin from the Flax Robe sect." The young woman called Li Lu left Mural City just. It was as if she couldn't be bothered taking another glance at the Rainbringer divine maiden. Pang Lanqi was standing there in a daze, and when he raised a hand to his forehead, he discovered that it was already drenched in sweat. He sighed with emotion and said, "Senior brother Yang, Senior Li Lu was very scary." Yang Lin smiled and replied, "It's okay for you to say this in front of me, but be careful of being scolded by Master if you get overheard by him. He'll say that you need to cultivate your heart more." Pang Lanqi was a pure and innocent young man, and he felt like Senior brother Yang was indeed a very calm and composed person. He would definitely become a pillar cultivator of the Flax Robe sect in the future. However, Pang Lanqi failed to notice the complicated look in his senior brother's eyes. This was because Pang Lanqi was still oblivious to the fact that he had already lost the fated opportunity tied to the mural of the Deer Rider Divine Maiden. Inside Malicious Ghost Valley, a group of people didn't enter through the row of archways. Instead, one of them used their bonded item to directly rip open a door, allowing the flowing iridescent boat to furiously charge inside. Standing atop the bow of the ship was a young female sect leader dressed in Taoist robes and wearing a lotus flower hat, and standing beside her was the divine maiden with the 7-colored deer, as well as Zhang Shangzhen, who had changed his mind and decided to visit Malicious Ghost Valley with them after all. Even though the flowing iridescent boat was a paramount immortal treasure personally given to sect leader Guoqi by Heavenly Lord Xie, it was still much slower than normal as it flew through the thick mist in Malicious Ghost Valley. The flowing iridescent boat was like a comet shooting through the sky, and it was extremely eye-catching as it dragged against the miasma of Feng energy and gave rise to a 7-colored trail in its wake. At the same time, there were thunderous booms as the immortal ship sliced through the sky and roared forward. Many ghosts and entities on the ground started to flee, and many of the cities in their path rapidly implemented martial law and raised their guards. Zhang Shangzhen put a hand to his forehead and gazed into the distance, saying with a smile, "We're almost at Skeleton Wall City, sect leader He. Also, your flowing iridescent boat is truly a great treasure. Are you looking to sell it or not?" The young Taoist nun completely ignored his remarks. Just like her master, the dear rider divine maiden was also unwilling to pay any heed to this man who had no filter. Zhang Shangzhen suddenly turned around and said, "Sect leader He, if you're hellbent on killing him, I'll have to step between the two of you and try to block you somewhat. The gulf between your cultivation bases is so great after all. Of course, if Skeleton Wall City tries to bully the two of you beforehand, they'll also need to ask for the opinion of my willow leaf first." The Taoist nun remained silent. Zhang Shangzhen heaved a sigh. When it came to the relationships between men and women, owing money was easy to deal with while owing favors was very difficult to repay. Just how had Chen Ping'an managed to offend her? Chen Ping'an was still young, but his abilities were truly profound. If Chen Ping'an were present, Zhang Shangzhen would definitely raise a thumb and praise him for being a great role model. It was dawn when Chen Ping'an left the inn, telling the dozing inn attendant lying sprawled on the counter that he was checking out. The young inn attendant didn't think much about this, nodding in response to show that he understood. Even though the young wanderer wearing a bamboo hat was checking out 2 days in advance, it wasn't like the money that the wanderer wasted would fall into his pockets as a result. Thus, the young inn attendant was lacking energy and motivation as he instructed the female inn worker to clean the room. He would think about these things later. He turned his head and looked at the quiet street outside the inn, yet the figure of the young wanderer was already nowhere to be seen. The young inn attendant felt slightly unhappy as he thought about the news that had traveled over from Mural City. The fated opportunities tied to the 3 murals of the female heavenly officials had all been taken away by outsiders, and this was a complete betrayal of people like him who had wasted their time visiting the murals so often. He thought to himself that the 3 divine maidens weren't as ethereal and impressive as they appeared, and they had definitely run away to chase some handsome men and their powerful clan. The more the young inn attendant thought about this, the more deflated he became. This was absolutely infuriating. Chen Ping'an left the market and went to the row of archways at the entrance of Malicious Ghost Valley, handing 5 snowflake coins to a guard cultivator from the Flax Robe sect and obtaining a 9-fold seal script jade tablet. If one managed to leave Malicious Ghost Valley alive, one could return the jade tablet and receive 2 snowflake coins back. The entrance fee wasn't expensive, and it was only the cost of a dozen or so cups of gloomy tea from the swaying river. Moreover, people could enter without paying first, leaving this as a debt to the Flax Robe sect. As such, many criminals who were desperate and with no other options would do 3 things after entering Skeleton Shoal. First, they would spend a few copper coins at the river god temple of the swaying river to offer 3 sticks of incense and pray for good fortune. Second, they would visit the 3 murals in Mural City to try their luck. And finally, they would go to the market at Helpless Pass to purchase a Be at Ease compilation. Afterward, they would enter Malicious Ghost Valley through the row of archways and hand their fate to the heavens. After paying 5 snowflake coins, Chen Ping'an received the jade tablet that was inscribed with the seal script characters, "Majestic might of the heavens crushing all ghosts." The powerful spirits in the cities in the southern region of Malicious Ghost Valley would mostly refrain from provoking cultivators who possessed these jade tablets. After all, sect leader Guaqi stayed in Malicious Ghost Valley all year round to oversee a small town, and she would often bring cultivators from the 2 towns with her to hunt entities. However, the city lords of the large and small cities didn't restrict the movement of their subordinate ghosts because of this. Many city lords in the south had refused to take the jade tablet seriously in the past, and they had insisted on indulging themselves in brutally targeting and killing those who possessed the jade tablet. Zhu Quan, also known as esteemed immortal Guaqi and the sect leader of the Flax Robe sect, had led a group of several Earth immortal cultivators who were direct disciples of the ancestral hall and charged deep into the territory of their enemies without any regard for the consequences. risking damage to the foundation of her great Tao. Guoqi had a strong desire to kill the main culprits and display their lifeless heads to everyone in the region. In fact, esteemed immortal Guoqi's cultivation journey to reach the unpolished jade tier was only so slow because she always put herself in danger and fought against powerful enemies. She had genuinely been at the nascent tier for far too long. The most perilous time, sect leader Guoqi had returned by herself with severe wounds, with the heads of 3 Een spirit city lords hanging from her waist. Afterward, the previous sect leader of the Flax Robe sect had locked her up in the prison located at the back of the sect, stating that she was prohibited from leaving the mountains unless she advanced to the upper 5 tiers. When sect leader Guoqi was finally allowed to leave the mountains, the first thing she had done was return to malicious Ghost Valley. If it weren't for the previous sect leader issuing a strict decree before passing away, disallowing any sect leader from carelessly activating the immortal weapon bestowed upon them by their superior sect and summoning the 100,000 Een soldiers raised inside to attack middle 5 tiers, it was entirely possible that with sect leader Guoqi's temper, she would have risked severe damage to the sect once again to charge to Skeleton Wall City. Apart from Chen Ping'an, who was by himself, there were 3 other groups of people waiting at the entrance as well. Some were friends who had decided to travel around malicious Ghost Valley together, while some were accompanied by their subordinates and guards. They were all standing there and waiting for daybreak. If one weren't gambling with their lives, then it was important to pick an auspicious day and time to enter malicious Ghost Valley. There were some clan elders and sect elders present, and they continually reminded their youthful juniors to be extra careful after entering malicious Ghost Valley. Many of their warnings were very standard, and they were warnings that were already recorded in the Be at Ease compilation. Chen Ping'an tied the jade tablet to his waist and stood by himself relatively far away from the others. He breathed into his hands to warm them up. Daybreak arrived, and the elderly cultivator of the Flax Robe sect standing in the middle of the 2-colored glazed archway at the forefront of the archway stepped aside, wishing them luck with some auspicious words. "Here's wishing everyone a safe and smooth-sailing journey." A smile appeared on Chen Ping'an's face. His name was truly very good. Chen Ping'an walked at the very back of the group entering malicious Ghost Valley, looking at the archways that were made to different standards and decorated with plaques containing different content. This was an eye-opening experience. Before entering malicious Ghost Valley, Chen Ping'an had put on the green Dao robe, green grass, that the Purple Sun Residence's flood dragon Wu Yi had given him. At the same time, he had retrieved from his pocket treasure the walnut bracelet that Cyan Gorge Island's Lu Jimao had given him, as well as a stack of yellow paper talismans that he had prepared last night, placing all of these things inside his sleeves. Most of the talismans were elementary-grade talismans from the authentic death-avoiding book, such as Yang Energy Illumination Talismans, Barrier-Shattering Talismans, and of course the 3-inch movement talismans. One of the 3 talismans was made from precious golden material, and Chen Ping'an had spent much of his energy last night making this talisman. He could use it to flee or to fight for his life, and it would be most effective when used together with the deity drumming technique. It surprisingly took Chen Ping'an and the others a full 15 minutes to walk through the 20 archways, and standing on the 2 sides of the archways were armored soldiers that measured around 6 meters in height. These soldiers were statues of the 2 opposing sides that had done battle on the ancient battlefield of Skeleton Shoal. This was a chaotic battle between 2 powerful empires and their 16 vassal states, and the 2 sides had engaged in brutal warfare for a whopping 10 years, with both sides becoming increasingly rash and emotionally invested as time went on. They no longer cared about the fortunes of their empires and whatnot, and it was said that almost 10,000 cultivators from the mountains had traveled over from the north to spectate on the conflict. Chen Ping'an glanced back, and the figure of the cultivator standing guard at the entrance was already blurry and barely perceptible. Everyone came to a stop, and the area in front of them immediately opened up, with the heavens boundless and the earth vast. However, the clouds were dark and dreary, and the concentrated energy of the small mystical realm instantly surged into their acupoints, making it much more difficult to breathe. Everyone became solemn, and the 3 groups of cultivators in front of Chen Ping'an channeled the breathing technique explained in detail in the travel chapter of the Be at Ease compilation. They used this breathing technique to block the furious assault of the Yin energy. Among them, a young Qi refiner wearing dull gold robes still underestimated the ferocious Yin energy of malicious Ghost Valley, appearing slightly flustered as his face instantly flushed beet red. A woman standing beside him with a saber and a bow on her back hurriedly handed him an azure porcelain bottle, and only after drinking the 3 official attendant temple's sweet rain produced by their immortal sect did the young man's situation finally take a turn for the better. The young man felt slightly embarrassed, and he gave an apologetic smile to the woman who appeared to be his subordinate. The woman smiled in response, following which she started to look around, with her gaze eventually catching the gaze of an elder in black who was walking behind the young man the entire time. The elder gestured for her to be at ease. Malicious Ghost Valley was a good place to train and temper oneself, but it was also a good place for people to exact revenge on others. The woman and the elder were both subordinates of the young man. The woman was approximately 30 years old, and she was a pure martial artist who had just advanced to the 6th tier. This was a very rare sight. Even though the northern complete reed continent had a thriving cultivation world, there were still few female lesser grandmaster martial artists to begin with. There were even fewer who managed to advance to the 6th tier at such a young age. Generally speaking, only sect-level immortal forces and powerful clans in mortal empires could raise such outstanding subordinates and have them remain loyal. As for the elder in black, he was even more powerful and profound, and it was difficult to even discern whether he was a pure martial artist or a chi refiner. The other group of chi refiners consisted of a burly man who was holding an armor pellet and wearing a suit of snow-white militarian-due armor. Shimmering light traveled across the surface of the armor, causing the permeating yin energy to be unable to approach him. There was also an elderly cultivator who took off the box on his back, causing it to emit a soft sound of clanking porcelain wares. In the end, the elderly cultivator retrieved a porcelain vase shaped much like a slender woman. It was clear that this was a relatively high-grade spirit tool, and wisps of pure yin energy started to visibly funnel toward the vase as the elderly cultivator held it in his palm. However, the yin energy left as quickly as it had come, and only a grain-sized orb of yin energy was gathered and condensed at the vase opening, gently hovering and twirling in the air and not falling into the vase. Meanwhile, a middle-aged cultivator flicked his sleeve and summoned a verdant green banana leaf flag. Shaking the rosewood flag handle between his 2 fingers, the flag immediately grew in size to become as long as his arm. There was a long golden tassel on the rosewood handle, and the middle-aged cultivator used this to tie the banana leaf flag to his wrist. Silently reciting a mantra, yin energy instantly flowed toward the flag and washed over it like stream water, appearing as if someone were cupping water in their hands to wash their face. This was the simplest type of tempering technique, and to put things simply, it was as easy as taking out one spirit tool. This was all there was to it. However, how many treasured lands in a continent could possess such concentrated and pure yin energy? Even if such places existed, they would have already been taken over and sealed off by powerful sects, with outsiders prohibited from entering and obtaining any benefits. How many sects would be like the Flax Robe sect, allowing outsiders to freely enter and obtain fated opportunities? 2 cultivators who had decided to travel through Malicious Ghost Valley together exchanged a knowing smile. The purity of yin energy in Malicious Ghost Valley was indeed different from other places. It was most suitable for cultivators like them who cultivated ghostly techniques. They had truly entered a mountain of gold and silver. Afterward, it was up to them how much of these treasures they could obtain and carry away. As for the militarian cultivator who possessed an armor pellet, he was a bodyguard whom they had spent a huge sum of wealth to enlist the help of. Compared to the yin energy at the border of Skeleton Shoal and Malicious Ghost Valley that had already been filtered by the mountain and water formation of the Flax Robe sect, the yin energy naturally produced in Malicious Ghost Valley was much more abundant and cold. The further one ventured into Malicious Ghost Valley, the more valuable the yin energy would become. Of course, the dangers would naturally become greater as well. It was even possible that one would be forced to do battle against the yin spirits and malicious ghosts, obtaining several sets of skeletons if they emerged victorious. This was another healthy sum of money. If one were defeated, however, then everything would be over as one suffered a most miserable fate. Compared to mortal humans, chi refiners were much more privy to the pitiful nature of being reduced to a yin entity in Malicious Ghost Valley. Chun Ping'an stopped looking at them after taking just a few glances. Absorbing yin energy in Malicious Ghost Valley was a huge taboo, and there was a clear warning regarding this in the Flax Robe sect's Be at Ease compilation. Such behavior would very easily provoke and draw the ire of spirits in the mystical realm. After all, it was completely understandable that no one wanted thieves in their house. However, each person had their own fated encounters, and the Flax Robe sect wouldn't obstruct those who were capable and courageous. The final two people looked like a pair of young Dao partners, and they were both carrying an extremely large wooden box on their backs, making it look as if they had come to malicious Ghost Valley to pick up bargain goods. Apart from the most precious energy and skeletons, malicious Ghost Valley actually produced many peculiar flowers, plants, and spirit beasts as well. Much of this flora and fauna was recorded in the Be at Ease compilation, but ever since the Flax Robe sect had opened malicious Ghost Valley up to the outside world, countless people had already entered this mystical realm over the past 1,000 years to try their luck. Not only that, but the Flax Robe sect also had cultivators responsible for searching for natural treasures in the mystical realm all year round. Due to these reasons, very few people had experienced great fortune and found highly coveted natural treasures in the past 100 years. Chen Ping'an squatted down and grabbed a handful of soil, gently manipulating it in his hand. Sure enough, it was extremely cold, much like the 1,000-year-old dirt at burial grounds. Chen Ping'an dropped the dirt and picked up an ordinary stone that could be found anywhere in the surroundings. He squeezed the stone and frowned. The stone was relatively soft, so much so that it was almost identical to the dirt. This was as expected of malicious Ghost Valley. Even the earth here was strange. The Flax Robe sect had constructed 2 towns in malicious Ghost Valley, one called Orchid Scent Town and one called Green Cottage Town. The former was located in the southernmost region of the mystical realm, and it was similar in size to the market at Helpless Pass. The latter was located in a mountain pass near the westernmost side of the central region of the mystical realm, and this was the town where sect leader Zhu Quan cultivated much of the time. Esteemed immortal Guiqi guarded this place all year round, and the city lord of Skeleton Wall City had visited Green Cottage Town twice in the past 300 years, traveling there by himself both times. He had fought against Zhu Quan and the Earth Immortals of the Flax Robe sect, and the battles were so fierce that Zhu Quan had destroyed countless surrounding mountain peaks with her bonded item, a Dao saber. The 2 paths leading to the north of malicious Ghost Valley had also been formed due to these battles. Heading to Orchid Scent Town was the safest choice, seeing that it was close and almost a straight path from the entrance. Orchid Scent Town was only 40 kilometers away, but there were many places near the town that one needed to visit despite its close distance from the entrance. There were famous scenic spots for people to enjoy, for example, an ancient underground palace that had already been abandoned for a very long time, Whitehead Peak that was filled with jagged rocks and was snow-white in color, and a city that had chosen to subordinate itself to the Flax Robe sect. The city lord was a Yin spirit who had been an imperial preceptor skilled at Taoist talismans when he was alive, and he often engaged in the exchange of goods with cultivators from the outside world. On the other hand, the journey to Green Cottage Town was surprisingly more than 400 kilometers due to the natural obstructions caused by the undulating mountains and winding rivers. Perhaps people might think about riding on the wind, riding on their swords, or riding on their immortal treasures, but the Be at Ease compilation made it abundantly clear that doing so would be an act of seeking death, even if one were a golden core tier Earth immortal. As for powerful cultivators at the nascent tier, coming to the eerie malicious Ghost Valley filled with a murderous aura would be of no benefit, unless one cultivated ghostly techniques. In fact, coming here might even grind away one's cultivation. In any case, nascent tier cultivators were often unwilling to interact with the mortal world, and they seldom left their abodes to venture through the outside world. Venturing outside was a waste of time. The nascent tier cultivator of the Flax Robe sect was looking after their intercontinental ship right now, but this was an act of helplessness since he no longer had the opportunity to advance to the unpolished Jade tier. As such, the old nascent tier cultivator with the surname Su couldn't be blamed for appearing slightly gloomy. It was because of these reasons that people joked that nascent tier cultivators and ascension tier cultivators were old turtles hiding in their shells. Chen Ping'an chose to travel directly to Green Cottage Town. Moreover, he wouldn't necessarily follow the so-called official road that had been painstakingly opened up by the Flax Robe sect. The young man, who was clearly a disciple from a large sect, joined the group of cultivators consisting of a ghost cultivator and a military and itinerant cultivator, and this newly formed group decided to make their way to Orchid Scent Town first. As for whether they took the risk to travel to Green Cottage Town afterward, this was hard to say. What surprised Qian Ping'an slightly was the decision of the two Dao partners. Their cultivation bases didn't appear very high, but they surprisingly chose the dangerous path to Green Cottage Town as well. It was extremely likely that the two of them were vagrant cultivators, and they spoke quietly to each other as they held hands and walked together toward the north. They were encouraging each other, and even though they appeared a little eager and hopeful, there was also a hint of steely resolve in their eyes. They were truly risking everything for the sake of making money. Qian Ping'an increased his speed and walked in front of them, creating a large gap between the two parties. Him walking in front of them was definitely better than him walking behind them. At the very least, it would eliminate any need for them to be suspicious of him. The Dao partners also slowed down, whether intentionally or not, and they frequently stopped to either scoop up some soil or pull out some grass. In fact, they would even dig holes and look for stones, being picky and choosy about what they collected. The distance between them grew greater and greater. When the vagrant cultivator Dao partners raised their heads again, the figure of the young wanderer was already nowhere to be seen. The sky in Malicious Ghost Valley was gray and gloomy, appearing as if it were overcast and about to rain. This environment somewhat limited one's vision. Qian Ping'an walked faster and faster. There was a long and winding small path to Green Cottage Town, and this path did its best to avoid the many large and small cities in the southern region of Malicious Ghost Valley. However, living people from the Yang world walking through Malicious Ghost Valley, which was formed from the resentment of dead people, were like fireflies fluttering through the night sky. They were as eye-catching as could be. Many malicious ghosts that had completely lost their minds were extremely sensitive to the existence of Yang energy, so those who ventured through Malicious Ghost Valley could draw wave upon wave of malicious ghosts toward themselves if they accidentally caused too much commotion. To powerful Yin spirits who ruled over a city, these relatively powerful malicious ghosts were nothing but a nuisance. They couldn't be controlled if they were recruited as subordinates, and they would refuse to listen to commands and might even fight to the death with each other, weakening the entire city. Thus, they were allowed to roam freely in the desolate lands, and they would also be used as targets for military practice. Qian Ping'an stopped at a dense forest beside the small path. There were crows silently resting on the branches, and as he looked back, he could see flickering shadows and swaying white garb in the depths of the forest, appearing suddenly before disappearing in a flash. Qian Ping'an decided to leave the small path and walk toward the dense forest. The crows flapped their wings and flew away, causing the dry branches to sway and appear ghosts brandishing their claws and widening their maws. When Qian Ping'an stepped into the dense forest, however, there was nothing out of the ordinary apart from some worn and rusty armor poking out from the ground. With a tap of his foot, Qian Ping'an leaped onto a tall branch before scanning the surroundings. He still wasn't able to detect anything out of the ordinary. When he suddenly shifted his gaze and looked carefully, however, he finally saw half a pale face sticking out from behind a tree. This looked like a woman with sanguine lips, and she locked gazes with Qian Ping'an in this completely lifeless forest. The movement of her pupils was stiff and limited, and it was as if she were looking Qian Ping'an up and down. Qian Ping'an adjusted his bamboo hat and planned to ignore the lurking Yin entity. He was just about to leap off the tall branch, yet he discovered that the branch underfoot had suddenly snapped without any warning. Qian Ping'an shifted aside and looked down, only to see blood slowly seeping from the break point and dripping onto the ground below. After the blood seeped into the soil, it was as if the rusty suits of armor were being put on by someone, with the weapon in the ground also being pulled out. In the end, more than a dozen invisible armored soldiers swayed back and forth as they surrounded the tall tree that Qian Ping'an was standing atop. Qian Ping'an jumped down, perfectly landing on the shoulder of one of the armored soldiers. To his surprise, the suit of armor immediately scattered across the ground like ashes. Qian Ping'an flicked his sleeve, causing astral wind to sweep past and reduce all of the armored soldiers to ashes. He then turned around and looked at someplace behind him, and the woman in white who had only shown half her face the entire time was hiding behind a tree and giggling with her hand over her mouth. However, her giggle didn't make a single sound. Qian Ping'an smiled and asked, "Where do the powerful malicious ghosts appear in the nearby mountains and waters?" The woman's movements were stiff as she slowly raised a hand and pointed at herself. Qian Ping'an smiled and shook his head, saying, I'm talking about the type that can't be killed with a single punch. The woman in white faltered when she heard this, and her face immediately became twisted. It was as if there were worms wriggling under her deathly white skin, and she swung her palm and cut down the large tree with a well-sized trunk as if she were slicing through tofu. She then launched another powerful palm strike at Qian Ping'an. Qian Ping'an also raised a hand, causing astral energy to gather in front of him like a wall. The severed tree was blasted into smithereens, with the flying debris temporarily blotting out heaven and earth. There was a cool sensation at the sole of Qian Ping'an's feet, and this was because two snow-white sleeves had shot out of the ground and wrapped around his ankles. The head of the female entity soon poked out from the soil as well. It was no wonder she only showed half her face to other people. As it turned out, even though half of her face was deathly pale, it was at least the face of a young woman. In stark contrast, the other half of her face was nothing more than a thin layer of skin wrapped around her skull. Looking at her complete appearance, it was as if she were an ugly woman who only had half a face. The deathly pale side of her face was like a pitifully sobbing woman as she said in a quivering voice, "General, you can kill me if you resent me for being disloyal to you, but please stop cutting my face with your saber. I can't stand the pain." Qian Ping'an allowed her to restrain his feet with her sleeves, and he looked down and asked, "You're one of the 4 trusted ghost generals of the nearby meticulous skin city's city lord, right? Why are you so close to the path? I have the jade tablet of the Flax Robe sect on me, so you shouldn't be coming over here to search for food. Are you not afraid of being targeted by the cultivators of the Flax Robe sect?" The female ghost didn't pay any heed to his words, and she extended 2 fingers to rip away the skin on the featureless side of her face, exposing the harrowing sight of her skull that was also riddled with deep cuts from a saber. It was clear that she had suffered torturous physical pain before her death. She sobbed silently, and she pointed at her exposed bones and said, "General, it hurts. It really hurts." Qian Ping'an surprisingly squatted down and held his hands inside opposite sleeves, looking into the female ghost's eye and saying, "All right, that's enough. Your hypnosis technique is ineffective against me. I've heard that Meticulous Skin City has always maintained a good relationship with the Flax Robe sect, but the city has a group of mortal enemies led by an Earth Immortaline entity who's especially skilled at close-quarter combat. He has few subordinates, with only a dozen or so malicious ghosts under his command, but he always wanders around and causes trouble. He's as elusive as those elite scouts on the borders. The favorite activity of this golden core Tyrian entity is to eat living people, especially chi refiners, and people who fall into his grasp will suffer a fate worse than death. They'll be raised like livestock, and they'll have a leg cut off one day and have a slab of flesh cut off another day. However, none of these injuries will be life-threatening. Moreover, this golden core Tyrian entity and his subordinates are quite smart, and they know better than to offend the ghosts of larger cities. They specifically target weaker cities, and this is the reason for them targeting Meticulous Skin City. They secretly kidnap 1 or 2 female entities from time to time, and the fate of those captured is as miserable as can be. The female ghost in white continued to ignore Qian Ping'an's words, instead murmuring, "It hurts, it genuinely hurts. I know I was wrong, so please be more gentle with your blade, General." At this moment, Qian Ping'an was already enveloped in thick white mist, making it appear as if he were inside a formless white cocoon. Qian Ping'an's shoulder shuddered slightly, unleashing powerful astral energy that immediately dispersed the white mist. The female ghost knew that the situation had turned against her, so she was just about to burrow into the ground to escape. However, Qian Ping'an's fist rapidly smashed into her forehead, causing the circulation of her energy to falter and stop. Qian Ping'an then grabbed her by the neck and dragged her out of the soil, following which he flicked his wrist and forcefully threw her to the ground. The female ghost in white curled up into a ball, lying limply on the ground like a snow-white snake whose bones had been completely snapped. Qian Ping'an sighed and said, "I'll have no option but to get serious if you continue to dilly-dally." The female ghost in white giggled and floated up, surprisingly transforming into an entity that measured 9 meters in height. The snow-white dress that she was wearing also grew in size. There were a few concise sentences in the Be at Ease compilation introducing this female ghost of Meticulous Skin City. The female ghost referred to herself as half-face makeup, and she had been the concubine of a meritorious general when she was still alive. She had transformed into a resentful spirit following her death, and due to her possession of a Dao robe that had come from some unknown origin, she was especially skilled at creating illusions of beautiful women and using fog barriers to cloud the eyes and judgment of cultivators. This would then allow her to do as she pleased, cracking open her victims' bones to drink their bone marrow and lapping up their spiritual energy as if she were drinking wine. She was extremely difficult to kill, and she had managed to survive even after being struck by an Earth Immortal Sword Cultivator sword strike one time. The sleeves of the towering female ghost in white flowed in the air, undulating slightly like the ripples in a river. She raised a hand that was as large as a straw mat and quickly ran it down her face. She locked gazes with Qian Pingyan, with her remaining eye shimmering with multiple colors. In the next moment, her appearance immediately changed with no warning. Qian Pingyan narrowed his eyes and said, "Now you're seeking death." The female ghost started to circle around Qian Pingyan, swaying back and forth as her silvery voice reverberated around Qian Pingyan like a sweet and enchanting spell. "Can you bring yourself to kill me? Are you capable of killing me? Why don't you and I embrace and become one? You only need to sacrifice some yang energy and spiritual energy to indulge yourself with the woman whom you love. I'll benefit and you won't lose out either, so what's not to like about this deal?" If this were the past, regardless of whether it was Qian Pingyan's journey through the Eastern Treasured Vial continent, his trip to the Parasol Leaf continent, or his accidental visit to the Lotus Flower Blessed Land, Qian Pingyan would have carefully concealed his trump card and genuine abilities, only drawing on enough strength and techniques to defeat his enemy. It could be said that he was incredibly cautious as he took things one step at a time. If he had encountered this female ghost at some other place in the past, he would have definitely fought against her using his fist techniques first, after which he would have used his talismans if required. Only if both of these were insufficient would he summon 15th from his sword nurturing gourd. After that, Sword Immortal on his back would be the final option. Today was different, however, and Qian Pingyan directly drew Sword Immortal from the scabbard on his back, holding the sword in his hand and casually beheading the female ghost in a single stroke. After the female ghost's head and body were separated, the head that had reverted to its original appearance hovered in the air for a moment before crashing straight down into the ground, causing the female ghost to unleash a deafening wail. She was just about to respond, yet Qian Pingyan had already driven his sword through her head, pinning her to the ground. With a casual yank, he then grabbed the snow-white Dao robe that immediately transformed into the size of a silk handkerchief. It was filled with spiritual energy and as light as a feather, feeling slightly cool in the hand yet not containing any murderous energy. This was a fairly decent Dao robe that was perhaps no inferior to the green Dao robe that he was currently wearing. This female ghost didn't possess any combat power to speak of, and just like Qian Pingyan had said, he could easily leave her half dead with a single punch. However, the problem was that this wasn't her true body, so he wouldn't be able to wound her foundations no matter how he attacked and killed this clone. This female ghost was extremely difficult to deal with. Moreover, the female ghost with no physical body could perhaps rely on her secret techniques to harass Qian Pingyan countless times in this area that was filled with abundant energy. She could harass him until her clone, which was much like a soul traveling far away from its owner, exhausted all of its energy and lost contact with her true body. Qian Pingyan's flying swords, 1st and 15th, suffered from a similar problem, and unlike the genuine bonded flying swords of those paramount terrestrial sword immortals, they were temporarily unable to pierce through time and ignore all barriers, following the smallest traces to silently kill enemies. However, Sword Immortal was different. The female ghost from Meticulous Skin City had mysteriously come, and now her clone had just as mysteriously been destroyed. Not only was her clone comprehensively obliterated in the blink of an eye, but there was no doubt that her true body had been wounded as well. Sword Immortal quietly returned to its scabbard by itself. Right after Qian Pingyan placed the small and exquisite Dao robe inside his sleeve, he saw a hunchbacked old woman walk over from nearby. She appeared to be walking slowly, yet she was actually using a land-shortening technique, allowing her to arrive 10 or so paces in front of Qian Pingyan in no time at all. The old woman had a dark expression as she said, "It was just some harmless probing, so was it necessary for you to use such resolute and lethal force? Do you really think Meticulous Skin City is an easy target for you to pick on? The city lord is already making her way over, so enjoy the final moments of your life." Chan Ping'an looked up, and he saw a gigantic chariot rumbling over on the wind. It was surrounded by a magnificent convoy of female officials, with some holding treasured canopies to block the sun, some holding ritual batons to clear the path, and some holding huge feather-made fans to block the wind and dust. The female officials were like a myriad of stars surrounding the moon, making the chariot appear like that of an emperor patrolling his lands. By the looks of it, the city lord of meticulous Skin City had personally made her way over. Regardless of whether it was heroic spirits ruling over a region or powerful Een spirits controlling the mountains and rivers of an area, all of the ghosts and Een entities in malicious Ghost Valley were more unruly and unrestrained compared to the island masters in Bamboo Scroll Lake. It was only because the female ghosts of meticulous Skin City weren't powerful enough that they weren't able to commit any huge sins. This was the reason why they enjoyed a slightly better reputation than the other cities. Chan Ping'an adjusted his bamboo hat and retracted his gaze, looking at the hunchbacked old woman who had a cloudy expression and responding, "I wasn't brought up with fear. You damaged the foundation of my sister's cultivation, so you need to pay for your actions," the hunchbacked old woman said with a cold smile. "What does it matter even if you're an earth immortal sword cultivator wielding a divine weapon? There will still be no escape for you." Chan Ping'an offered no response to this. Seeing that the city lord's chariot was about to arrive, the hunchbacked old woman started to recite a mantra and cast an immortal technique. As if growing legs, the withered trees started to move around and plow open the ground, quickly creating a large open space with no obstructions. As the chariot slowly descended, two female ghosts in green who were holding ivory ritual batons and responsible for opening the path landed on the ground first, tossing out their ritual batons and causing a spring of white light to rush over the earth. The soil of the dense forest immediately transformed into a white jade plaza that was extraordinarily even and without a single impurity. Chan Ping'an was unwilling to make any contact with the flowing white light as it rushed past his feet, so he lightly jumped up and summoned a dry branch from nearby, stabbing the meter-tall branch into the ground before standing on its tip. When fighting alongside Mao Xiaodong in the capital of the Great Sui nation before, Mao Xiaodong had especially explained to Chan Ping'an the powerful nature of formation cultivators afterward. The two female ghosts in green exchanged a smile. They hadn't expected that the powerful outsider who had caused Lady Bai to suffer was actually such a coward. "Such impressive courage, young master," the hunchbacked old woman sneered. "Such impressive observation skills, old grandma," Chan Ping'an retorted. The two beautiful female ghosts in green covered their mouths and chuckled in amusement. Living humans were naturally a rare sight in malicious Ghost Valley, which was crawling with ghosts and Een entities, and interesting living men were an even rarer sight. The gigantic chariot that appeared much like the small building of a maiden slowly descended to the ground, with two female ghosts dressed in extravagant honorary clothes immediately pulling back the curtains of the chariot in a soft and gentle manner. One of them then bowed and said in a mellow voice, "We've arrived, City Lord." Chan Ping'an looked up, and he saw a little girl wearing a phoenix headdress and a red face cover sitting inside the chariot. Her makeup was a bit too thick, and there was a dazed look in her eyes. It was as if she were a soulless puppet. The hems of her dress spread outward like a surprisingly big lotus leaf, and it covered almost the entire inside of the chariot. However, this made the little girl appear hilariously small in comparison. The city lord of meticulous Skin City was called Fan Yunluo, and following her death, she had occupied this city, and especially recruited female ghosts to assume the various official positions. She detested men, and she had given herself the title of High Official Rouge. She was naturally short and petite, and even though this was the case, it was said that her body was very well proportioned. In fact, she was as light as a feather, and the history books once mentioned her dancing on someone's palm. Moreover, she was skilled at poetry and singing, and countless men had submitted themselves to her. Before her death, she was a princess whom the emperor had pampered to an extraordinary degree. The other female ghost wearing an extravagant honorary dress appeared slightly helpless, and she had no option but to repeat again, "Wake up, City Lord, we've arrived at our destination." The little girl shuddered and shook her head, still appearing a little dazed as clarity gradually returned to her eyes. She covered her mouth and yawned, and the glistening silk glove on her hand revealed a small section of her beautiful and jade-like wrist. Fan Yunluo peered down at the young man wearing a bamboo hat and standing on the dry branch, and she asked, Are you the unfriendly person who caused my dear official Bai to become severely wounded and forced to slumber in the soul-washing pond? Do you know that she received my command to discuss a profitable transaction with you? Treating the good intentions of others as ill will is an act that will lead to negative consequences. Seeing that the young man was showing no signs of wanting to respond, Fan Yunluo didn't become angry, and she continued, "Oh, that's right, where's the snowflake Dao robe? Where have you hidden it? It's not my dear official Bai's token of love to you, so why are you hiding it from everyone? You should take it out and return it. This is one of her favorite items, something that she cherished as much as her own life. She'll be heartbroken if she loses this Dao robe. Meticulous Skin City looked for you with good intention, yet you acted dastardly and repaid us with ill will. Disregarding this matter first, it's indeed the case that people need to speak with their fists in malicious Ghost Valley. You obtained the snowflake Dao robe with your abilities, so feel free to name your price now. We'll buy it back from you." Chan Ping'an smiled and asked, "How much is this Dao robe worth in City Lord Fan's eyes?" "It should be worth at least 3 to 5 grain rain coins," Fan Yunluo replied in a serious voice. "It's also one of official Bai's favorite items, so since I'm the one buying it back for her, this will definitely double the price. After taking the middle value, I'll say that it's worth 8 grain rain coins. Is City Lord Fan now going to ask me how many immortal coins my measly life is worth?" And after subtracting the 8 grain rain coins and returning the Dao robe to Meticulous Skin City, I still need to offer a large sum of immortal coins as a form of apology. Fan Yunluo's eyes lit up, with her childish face filled with curiosity as she leaned forward and remarked, "How are you so sharp? You're not a parasite in my stomach, are you? How are you able to read my thoughts so accurately?" She shook her large sleeves and continued, "Very well. I'll naturally bestow upon you immense wealth after you apologize and offer us compensation. Rest assured, I guarantee that you'll make a fortune." "What's this transaction about?" Chun Ping'an asked. Fan Yunluo extended her hands and replied with a faint smile, "Hand over the snowflake Dao robe and the grain rain coins, and then we can sit down and discuss this transaction which will bring riches to you and all of your descendants in the future." "Why doesn't City Lord Fan discuss this transaction with the cultivators of the Flax Robe sect or other powerful cultivators traveling around malicious Ghost Valley?" Chun Ping'an asked. Fan Yunluo narrowed her eyes and replied, "That bunch of stubborn old cultivators is completely focused on slaying demons and subduing fiends and has no desire to make any money, so this transaction naturally doesn't interest them at all. On the other hand, ordinary chi refiners have too low a cultivation base and are unable to support this transaction. They'll end up wasting the time and energy of my Meticulous Skin City. Meanwhile, those who possess too high a cultivation base might turn around and attack us instead if we can't reach an agreement regarding how the spoils are shared. All of these things detrimentally affect my sweet dreams, so my dear official Bai and the others have searched hard for a candidate for over 100 years. In the end, they decided that you were the most suitable candidate." After saying this, Fan Yunluo's hand still remained outstretched, waiting for Chan Ping'an to return the Dao robe and offer immortal coins as an apology. There was a slight hint of a murderous aura on her face as she asked, "Do you know how tiring it is for me to hold this position?" Chun Ping'an fell deep into thought. There were many cities of varying sizes in the southern region of malicious Ghost Valley, and including Meticulous Skin City, most of them had a relatively peaceful relationship with the Flax Robe sect, with neither interfering with the other as they maintained a peculiar state of coexistence. However, it was exceedingly difficult for these cities to interact with cultivators from Skeleton Shoal. As such, many city lords would rely on their abilities and observation skills to find one or several cultivators to work together with, tasking these cultivators with becoming their link to the outside world. This would allow them to conduct business with the outside world, creating a mutually beneficial transaction in which both parties stood to gain. Otherwise, the entities of malicious Ghost Valley would be stuck in the awkward situation of exhausting the limited resources in this mystical realm. Regardless of how much energy existed in malicious Ghost Valley, one could view it as a finite resource that wouldn't increase any further. As long as the entities of malicious Ghost Valley were powerful enough and could see far enough, they could somewhat notice some clues pertaining to the circulation of energy and fortune when they reached a high vantage point and peered down at the entire mystical realm. Whenever a powerful spirit matured, This would imply less energy for the remaining ghosts and entities in malicious Ghost Valley. This was like a game of Go where each force had to fight for territory. One side's gain was another side's loss, and there was most definitely no option to work together and get rich together. Casting one's gaze to the northern region of malicious Ghost Valley, Skeleton Wall City ruled over more than half of the land, yet it still mobilized armies to invade the south on a very frequent basis. They would obtain abundant spoils of war each time. Because of this, diversifying their sources of income and trade was the #1 priority for the city lords in the south. The Flax Robe sect was guarding the archways which were the entrance and exit of malicious Ghost Valley, and even though it looked like they were encircling this mystical realm, they didn't actually prohibit the city lords in the south from raising puppets to engage in trade with the outside world. The Flax Robe sect potentially had its own plans regarding these matters. They were unwilling to have the forces in the south become too weak, lest the old saying of elites enjoying elite fortune come true. The Flax Robe sect didn't want Skeleton Wall City to successfully conquer and rule over the entire malicious Ghost Valley. There was a stern look on the old woman's face as she exclaimed, "Impudence! City Lord Fan is asking you a question, yet you actually dare to zone out." Just like Lady Bai, who only showed half her face to other people, this hunchbacked old woman was also one of the 4 trusted generals of Meticulous Skin City's City Lord Fan Yunluo. She had been a maidservant responsible for teaching other maidservants in the imperial palace when alive, and she had also been a guest elder of the imperial family at the same time. Even though she was a chi refiner at the time, her strength had been in close-quarter combat. This was the reason why Meticulous Skin City had dared to let her interact with Chan Ping'an even after Lady Bai was severely wounded. Otherwise, losing 2 generals would be a devastating blow to Meticulous Skin City, which wasn't very powerful to begin with. The cities nearby were no benevolent forces, after all. Fan Yunluo suddenly raised a hand, gesturing for the old woman not to push the young man. There was a cautious look on her face. The young wanderer slowly looked up and took off his bamboo hat. The bamboo hat vanished into thin air. This caused the hearts of the hunchbacked old woman and the 2 female ghosts in palatial dresses on the chariot to jolt slightly. Sure enough, this was a cultivator who possessed a paramount immortal treasure such as a pocket treasure or a miniature mobile armory. Chan Ping'an casually placed his bamboo hat inside his minimization treasure. The bamboo hat was as ordinary as could be, and wearing it was a suggestion made by Wei Bo and Zhu Lian. They had reminded Chan Ping'an to be careful about his aura, and to prevent it from seeping out too much when he wore the bamboo hat and traveled around the cultivation world. Otherwise, he would appear far too eye-catching, and he would end up warning his enemies of his presence. It was even more important for Chan Ping'an to be vigilant when he traveled through large marshes and deep mountains, places that were rife with ghosts and entities. Otherwise, he would be like someone holding a lantern and banging on gongs as he wandered through graveyards and desolate mountain ranges, and he would even appear to have a talisman on his forehead like Pei Qian. This would frighten and deter the weaker ghosts, but the more powerful ghosts would definitely charge over in rage. Chan Ping'an had already discovered these matters when traveling through the mountain range to the south of Bamboo Scroll Lake, but he hadn't been able to make heads or tails of the situation no matter what. He had chosen to shatter his golden scholarly core, so theoretically speaking, his righteous aura that imbued him with virtue and deterred all evil should have crumbled and dispersed along with it. Zhengyi Madui and Gukin had also felt extremely puzzled at the time, not understanding the reason behind Chan Ping'an's aura. After returning home and training in Downtrodden Mountain's bamboo building, Chan Ping'an had already learned how to freely suppress this aura of his following his rise in cultivation base to the 6th tier of martial arts. However, out of an abundance of caution, Chan Ping'an continued to wear his bamboo hat even when traveling around the central region of the eastern treasured Vile continent afterward. This bamboo hat would serve as a reminder to him. Chan Ping'an continued to suppress his aura even after taking off his bamboo hat, and he said with a smile, "I was confined by the situation in the past, and I was forced to engage in transactions with people who were mortal enemies of mine. There's no major hostility between your Meticulous Skin City and me right now, so it seems like the most logical option for us is to calmly discuss the matters. At the very least, we should maintain a semblance of decorum even if we can't agree to a transaction." I came to an understanding just then, and we can naturally engage in a transaction with each other since I can be regarded as half a wandering merchant now. I indeed want to make some money as well. However, the transaction between us can't delay my proper matters." Qian Ping'an retrieved the snow-white Dao robe that looked like a white silk handkerchief, saying, "I can return this Dao robe to Meticulous Skin City, but in exchange you need to tell me the location of that Earth Immortal ghost. I'm willing to engage in this transaction, but you can forget about the rest." Fan Yunluo slowly stood up, and even though she was in the chariot, she only reached the same height as the two female ghosts in palatial dresses standing outside the chariot. Fan Yunluo put on a stern expression and replied, "You babble too much, and you clearly don't look like someone who has the courage to fight to the death and ensure mutual destruction. I detest nothing more than people bargaining with me, so since you refuse to accept my goodwill, I'll rip out your soul and spirit and use them to light candles in Meticulous Skin City. We can discuss the transactions after this is done. You've asked for this punishment yourself, and you forsook the opportunity to make mountains of immortal coins to instead lose half your life and make a pittance. Thank you for enlightening me," Qian Ping'an said with a smile. This was the reason why one needed to adapt to the local traditions and customs. In the northern complete reed continent, haggling and speaking reason was the most inferior method. After all, hadn't that sage from the Confucian Academy also personally ventured out to beat those three powerful cultivators into submission? Qian Ping'an glanced at the sky. He had initially wanted to take things one step at a time, first warming up against that relatively weak golden courtier ghost. By the look of things, however, he needed to make some adjustments to his plan. Challenging the entire Meticulous Skin City by himself was also a rare training opportunity. Moreover, due to Meticulous Skin City's location in the southernmost region of Malicious Ghost Valley, and its close proximity to Orchid Scent Town, Qian Ping'an could advance and retreat as he pleased. In any case, Qian Ping'an had already made up his mind. He wouldn't leave any lurking dangers since he had decided to fight. Even if he retreated, that would simply be for the sake of preparing for his next battle with the ghosts of Meticulous Skin City. Otherwise, always worrying about surprise attacks coming from behind him while traveling by himself to the north would be far too troublesome. Moreover, choosing this path could potentially save him from using the gold paper land-shortening talisman. While traveling north just then, Qian Ping'an had carefully examined the yin and yang barrier of Malicious Ghost Valley. While doing so, he had a nagging feeling that he could genuinely rip open a small and temporary fissure if he launched a full-strength attack with Sword Immortal. However, he would become exhausted after ripping open a path, so it would still be extremely difficult for him to leave if the small fissure was located too far away from him. With this in mind, Qian Ping'an planned to make another gold paper land-shortening talisman. That way, he would still have the chance to flee from Malicious Ghost Valley and return to Skeleton Shoal even if the fissure were too far away, and even if he were being attacked by a powerful enemy. However, Qian Ping'an couldn't be too hasty with these matters, and he needed to find a quiet and deserted area to draw the talisman. Otherwise, to say nothing of 2 gold paper land-shortening talismans, even 20 wouldn't be of any use if he were exposed. There were many powerful Earth Immortals in Malicious Ghost Valley, and also the unpolished Jade Tier City Lord of Skeleton Wall City. It presumably wouldn't be too difficult for this city lord to leave Malicious Ghost Valley, and he was most likely just afraid of the Flax Robe sect enjoying a home advantage at Skeleton Shoal and having traps lying in wait for him. However, it was also possible that the Flax Robe sect actually hoped for this unpolished Jade Tier ghost to leave Malicious Ghost Valley. That way, the mystical world would be without its strongest leader. The various forces in Malicious Ghost Valley had always schemed and fought against each other for the past 1,000 years, resulting in brutal battles and deep-rooted hatred. Once the strongest city lord was removed from the equation, would they break apart and fragment even further? Fan Yunluo used her mind's voice to warn her subordinates. Be careful of the sword that he's carrying on his back. It's extremely likely that this sword is an immortal treasure that only Earth Immortal sword cultivators can possess. There was a fervent look in Fan Yunluo's eyes as she rubbed her palms together, causing her gloves to glow even brighter. This was one of the treasures that allowed her, High Official Rouge, to establish a city in the south of Malicious Ghost Valley and remain standing until now. She pursed her lips, thinking that she would definitely make a huge and unexpected profit if she managed to capture this young man. The green Dao robe that he was wearing was already quite valuable, and the wine gourd by his waist was perhaps a high-quality treasure being concealed by the illusion technique of some powerful cultivator. Finally, there was also the sword on his back. These three treasures were enough for Meticulous Skin City to use as its annual tribute to White Cage City. Not only that, but they only needed to pick one of the green Dao robe or vermilion wine gourd to offer. In other words, Meticulous Skin City would still enjoy a huge surplus. Afterward, the city could recruit 1,000 more soldiers, and at that time, perhaps they wouldn't need to live at the mercy of other forces anymore. To put things simply, Fan Yunluo had planned for two outcomes when sending Lady Bai, who was skilled at enchantment techniques but not skilled at combat, to feel out Chan Ping'an. If he were a tough opponent whom they couldn't overpower, then they would take a step back and propose a long and steady transaction with him instead. If, on the other hand, he possessed valuable treasures and was relatively weak, then Meticulous Skin City couldn't be blamed for targeting him and reaping the huge benefits for themselves. To say nothing of eating humans, those in malicious Ghost Valley would even eat ghosts. Chan Ping'an raised a hand and reached over his shoulder saying, "Go and play by yourself and remember to kill them in a single strike. Also, don't damage their skeletons, as I need to collect all of them to sell. Broken skeletons won't fetch a good price." Chan Ping'an then patted his sword nurturing gourd and said, "The same goes for the two of you." A streak of golden light flew out from the scabbard on his back. At the same time, two streaks of light flew out from the sword nurturing gourd by his waist, one snow white and one dark green. Standing on the White Jade Plaza, the dozens of female ghosts from Meticulous Skin City encircling Chan Ping'an suddenly saw a streak of gold flash past. Their eyes had still been filled with irrepressible fervor just a moment ago, yet they immediately became dull and lifeless the next moment. A speck of brilliant light further pierced through their glabella. Chan Ping'an was calm and unhurried as he rolled up his green sleeves and lightly jumped down from the dry branch, walking directly toward the gigantic chariot. Holding back against women? In the rundown old temple at the Watercombing Nation, the young boy in straw sandals had once unleashed a relentless flurry of punches at a female ghost's head, directly smashing that beautiful and voluptuous ghost into smithereens. At the city god pavilion of the colorful garment nation, he had been even more direct and ruthless during his battle against Shuro, back when she was still a beautiful bone ghost. Looking further back at the very beginning, Chan Ping'an had driven a porcelain shard through the neck of Dawn Cloud Mountain's Kaijinjian in an impoverished alley of the small town. The hunchbacked old woman trembled with fear, and she was seemingly in two minds about whether she should protect City Lord Fan or risk her life to stop this young man from leaving. Fan Yunluo's expression was ice-cold, yet it suddenly bloomed like a flower in spring the next moment, with her smile charming as she said, "Esteemed sword immortal, why don't we sit down to discuss things in a calm and civil manner? Everything is negotiable, and we'll do our best to satisfy esteemed sword immortal's demands." Chan Ping'an suddenly exerted power through his feet, causing a web of cracks to spread across the floor and directly shattering the White Jade Plaza formed from the two ritual baton spirit tools of the path-opening female ghosts as if it were fragile porcelain. Shards of the White Jade Plaza flew into the surroundings. Chan Ping'an directly charged toward the gigantic chariot. The two female ghosts attempted to stop Chan Ping'an, yet they were immediately sent flying by Chan Ping'an's overwhelming fist aura. Fan Yunluo's expression changed slightly, and she swung her sleeves around and caused her dress, which took up most of the space in the chariot, to ripple up and down. She giggled as she did this, yet the resentment and malice in her eyes was clear for all to see. Her voice was sweet, yet her words were nauseating as she said, "Oh, I'm so scared of you now. I'll see you later. If you're so capable, then come to Meticulous Skin City to show your love to me." The chariot shuddered, and her two trusted maidservants in palatial dresses were directly shaken off and left to fall to the ground. Chan Ping'an jumped high up and raised a hand, and as if in tacit understanding, Sword Immortal immediately flew over and landed in his hand. Chan Ping'an then directly slashed down. The gigantic chariot rolled in an agile manner, just barely dodging Chan Ping'an's sword strike. It then burrowed into the ground of the dense forest, rumbling loudly as it fled through the ground. With a tap of his foot, Chan Ping'an jumped into the air and landed on the blade of first that had just rushed over, immediately soaring more than 30 meters into the air. Following the commotion in the ground, his gaze then settled on a certain area. following which Sword Immortal left his hand and furiously shot down like a crossbow bolt. The gigantic chariot hurriedly changed direction, dodging the piercing attack of Sword Immortal. However, this slight pause inevitably caused Fan Yunluo's escape to slow down slightly. Using 1st and 15th as stepping stones, Qian Ping'an nimbly dashed through the air, raising a fist high up before launching a powerful punch at the ground. A loud boom reverberated through the ground, making it sound as if spring thunder were rumbling across this lifeless land. Bursts of treasured light flickered underground, carrying with them a torrent of angry curses from City Lord Fan Yunluo. However, her voice grew fainter and fainter as the chariot seemingly drew on all its power to burrow deeper underground. Qian Ping'an knew that this was an earth movement secret technique of the chariot, but there were likely limits to this technique as well. The chariot would be quicker when it floated above ground, and it would be slower and face increasing resistance the further underground it burrowed. This was due to the strange natural environment of malicious Ghost Valley. Fan Yunluo had been hopeful in the beginning, yet after suffering greatly at the hands of Qian Ping'an, she had no choice but to take the less damaging option, choosing to flee back to Meticulous Skin City more slowly for the sake of avoiding Qian Ping'an's ground-shaking fist aura and earth-piercing sword strikes. There was a mental link between Qian Ping'an and Sword Immortal, and the pseudo-celestial sword didn't ascend too high as Qian Ping'an stood atop it, doing its best to stick close to the ground as it flew toward Meticulous Skin City. As for Qian Ping'an's flying swords 1st and 15th, they had both burrowed underground to pursue the gigantic chariot. No matter what, he couldn't allow Fan Yunluo to flee back and hide in Meticulous Skin City too easily. In addition, Qian Ping'an also wanted to test Meticulous Skin City's city protection formation, gauging whether it could block his full-power sword strike. Qian Ping'an came to a stop above a small mountain. Standing there was an individual in Confucian robes, one who had no blood or flesh on his bones. There was also a sword hanging by his waist. The skeleton smiled faintly and said, "Even seemingly harmless rabbits will bite when cornered, so why do you insist on hunting down Fan Yunluo? She's always been someone to bully the weak and fear the strong, and she's most adept at assessing the situation. You don't need to worry about her creating endless trouble for you." 1. Many years have passed, and she's become the victim of her own smarts more than just once or twice. As such, she's already accustomed to suffering in silence. Since you've scared her so much, the only thing she'll do is lower her head and apologize to you. In any case, you'll break one of the rules established by Zhu Quan and the City Lord of Skeleton Wall City if you truly kill Fan Yunluo, and at that time, you'll be hunted down by an alliance of city lords. The city lords will be like a surging army of ants attacking an elephant, and you'll have no option but to leave malicious Ghost Valley if the situation comes to that. I'll do you a favor and give you another warning. Even if you fly close to the ground, you'll still be detected by the nearby city lords if you continue to travel north. And you are? Qian Ping'an asked. The skeleton swordsman in Confucian robes smiled faintly and replied, "The Golden Courtier Ghost whom Fan Yunluo coincidentally helped out is an unofficial member of my city. However, that's the extent of the relationship between me and that ghost. Anyhow, I suggest that you make haste and return to Crow Peak, or else you'll have done all this for nothing and have your spoils of battle snatched away by that Golden Courtier Ghost. Also, let me say this first. The hierarchical notions of rulers and officials and masters and servants are nothing but a joke in malicious Ghost Valley. No one takes these relationships seriously, and in front of the allure of benefits, they'll even oppose the heavens. It's up to you whether you believe this or not." Qian Ping'an smiled and said, "Ah, you're the city lord of White Cage City." The skeleton swordsman in Confucian robes clearly appeared comical, yet he somehow didn't appear discordant or absurd at all. He nodded and replied, "It's a pleasure to meet you." Qian Ping'an carefully considered things for a moment. He then smiled and patted his sword nurturing gourd, summoning 1st and 15th back into his gourd. Qian Ping'an placed his hands inside his opposite sleeves, with his left hand pinching a gold paper land-shortening talisman, and his right hand grabbing the walnut bracelet. "Does City Lord have any further recommendations?" he asked. The skeleton swordsman, who was one of the most powerful spirits in the southern region of malicious Ghost Valley, shook his head and replied, "No, that's all." Qian Ping'an jumped on Sword Immortal, drawing an arc through the air as he flew into the distance. The city lord of White Cage City lightly stomped his foot and said, You can come out now. A gigantic chariot rolled out from the foot of the mountain, with this paramount treasure of meticulous skin city severely damaged at this moment, clearly reflecting the formidable might of Qian Pingan's punch and sword strike. Sitting in the chariot, Fan Yunluo was covering her face with her hands and sobbing, appearing much like a pure and innocent little girl. The city lord in azure Confucian robes chuckled and said, "Say, when can you engage in a transaction where you don't make a loss? Why weren't you able to think things through clearly? That young man is extremely cautious no matter what he does. So why did he dare to travel directly to Green Cottage Town? Was he traveling here to seek death?" Fan Yunluo burst into tears, wailing in grief as she lay sprawled across the chariot. Qian Pingan breathed a sigh of relief when he returned to Crow Peak. Apart from the hunchbacked old woman being nowhere to be seen, the skeletons of the remaining female ghosts that he had killed were still on the ground. When flying back on Sword Immortal, Qian Pingan purposely flew at a slightly higher altitude than when he had pursued Fan Yunluo just then. Sure enough, the Golden Core Tier Ghost, who was an unofficial member of White Cage City, quickly turned around and left. It wasn't that Qian Pingan didn't want to make some small sacrifices to wipe out Meticulous Skin City, or at the very least, challenge it intermittently. According to his original plans, the entities that wandered around the southern region of Malicious Ghost Valley were his best training targets as he made his way to Green Cottage Town. However, the sudden appearance of City Lord Pu Rang of White Cage City caused Qian Pingan to change his mind. The Be at Ease compilation was filled with minor details about this heroic spirit, so much so that it was almost cumbersome to read. Innumerable matters pertaining to this city lord were recorded, and the author hadn't attempted to save any ink. In fact, Qian Pingan was almost led to believe that the author of the Be at Ease compilation was an admirer of City Lord Pu Rang. The beautiful words of praise in the book were seemingly exuding a sanguine aura, yet this hadn't affected Qian Pingan's decision in the least. Rather, the true reason behind Qian Pingan's decision to relent was one simple fact. This city lord was at the peak stage of the nascent tier. Since City Lord Pu Rang had ultimately chosen to personally appear in front of Qian Pingan but not attack him, Qian Pingan was willing to follow suit and also take a step back. Qian Pingan looked at the jade-like skeletons strewn across the ground of the dense forest. There were more than a dozen sets of skeletons, with all of them being victims of Sword Immortal 1st and 15th. The souls of these female ghosts from Meticulous Skin City had vanished long ago, transforming into the fundamental energy of this mystical realm. Qian Pingan was just about to place these skeletons inside his minimization treasure, yet he suddenly frowned and jumped onto Sword Immortal, preparing to leave this place straight away. After some brief contemplation, however, he decided to pause for a moment and collect the large majority of skeletons, leaving just 6 or 7 sets on the ground. Only after doing this did he rapidly leave Crow Peak on his sword. Qian Pingan breathed a sigh of relief when he stood at a distance and looked at the 2 figures on the small and winding path. However, he was still a little worried, so he returned Sword Immortal to the scabbard on his back and put on his bamboo hat again, descending to the ground in a secluded area before returning to the small path and quietly waiting for the Dao partners to draw near. The Dao partners also saw Qian Pingan, and just like before, they planned to take a detour around the small path and pretend to look for some medicinal herbs and stones that could be exchanged for money. However, they discovered that the young wanderer only took off his bamboo hat but showed no signs of moving over. The Dao partners exchanged a helpless glance, and they were left with no choice but to summon their courage and return to the small path, with the man walking in front and the woman walking behind him. If this were a blessing, then it wouldn't be a misfortune. If this were a misfortune, then it couldn't be avoided. They silently prayed for the protection of the 3 pure ones as they walked toward Qian Pingan. After the Dao partners drew closer, Qian Pingan held his bamboo hat with one hand and pointed at the dense forest behind him with his other hand, saying, "I had a violent struggle with a group of malicious ghosts at Crow Peak just then, and even though I achieved a narrow victory, a large number of malicious ghosts still managed to flee. This has caused deadly hostility between us, so further battles will be inevitable in the future. If the 2 of you aren't afraid of being detrimentally affected by me and want to continue north, then please make sure to be extra careful." The Dao partners had aggrieved expressions as they exchanged another glance with each other. They had each handed over 5 snowflake coins at the archways to enter this mystical realm, and this was a cost that they were somewhat able to swallow. However, the two of them were fifth-tier vagrant cultivators with no support or backing, and they weren't chi refiners skilled at ghost Dao immortal techniques either. They needed to continually exhaust spiritual energy after entering malicious Ghost Valley. And this was not only rough on the body and mind, but they had even bought a vial of expensive alchemical pills specifically to address this issue. This was so that they could push themselves more and walk further into the depths of malicious Ghost Valley, hopefully coming across some valuable treasures in the more secluded areas of the mystical realm, and thereby helping them recoup their costs. Otherwise, if they only cared about safety, they would have chosen the much more popular path to Orchid Scent Town. After becoming cultivators and embarking on the pursuit of immortality, how many people would be brainless fools? This was especially the case when it came to vagrant cultivators trying to make money. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they would rack their brains and think of every possibility. The Dao partners were deathly pale, and the young woman tugged at the sleeves of the man and said, "Let's just forget about it first. This is fate, and cultivating a bit slower is definitely better than dying." However, the man shook his head and held onto the young woman's hand, saying in a soft voice, "You can't afford to wait any longer. Water will overflow if too full, as too the moon will shrink once full. Waiting any longer will only harm you instead, causing something good to turn into something bad." He then let go of her hand and looked at Chan Ping'an, his expression resolute as he cupped his fists and said in gratitude, "Things are unpredictable and ever-changing on the path of cultivation, so since my wife and I possess lowly cultivation bases, we have no option but to leave things up to fate. We can't blame young master for this. In fact, Zhuojing and I need to thank young master for your good-intentioned warning. Is your Dao partner on the verge of advancing to the abode tier, but due to her unstable foundations, requires immortal money and immortal tools to increase her chances of success?" Chen Ping'an asked. The young woman sighed softly upon hearing this. The man nodded and replied, "Young master truly has a sharp eye. This is indeed the case. Please forgive me for asking, but how much do you still need?" Chen Ping'an asked. The man had a helpless expression as he replied, "It's a humongous number to the two of us, or else we wouldn't have been forced to enter malicious Ghost Valley. We're genuinely gritting our teeth and mustering our courage to flirt with death." "How many immortal coins do you still need?" Chan Ping'an asked in a tentative voice. The man hesitated for a moment before revealing with a bitter expression, "To be honest with you, my wife and I have traveled across more than a dozen nations over the past few years, and after picking and choosing, we finally set our eyes on a bonded item that's most suitable for Zhuojing to refine when we visited an immortal shop in the western region of Skeleton Shale. The price was already very fair, but it was still 800 snowflake coins. Moreover, this was thanks to the shopkeeper showing incredible kindness and being willing to hold the spirit tool for 5 years, even though he didn't lack any customers or interest. As long as we managed to gather enough immortal coins within these 5 years, we can return to the shop at any time to purchase the spirit tool. However, both of us are lower 5-tier itinerant cultivators, so after visiting the markets in various nations and making money however we could, we're still 500 snowflake coins short of our target. It's the unfortunate truth that we're not capable enough." There was pain and grief in Zhuojing's heart. In reality, there were some details that her husband had still left out. These things were truly too embarrassing to say. In order to enter malicious Ghost Valley to look for 500 snowflake coins, they had spent another 100 or so snowflake coins to purchase that vial of chi replenishment alchemical pills. After entering malicious Ghost Valley and making their way here, the silver that they had gathered was only equivalent to less than 1 snowflake coin. It wasn't so easy to make money in malicious Ghost Valley. The Dao partner saw the young wanderer in green and with a sword on his back seemingly hesitate about something, and he was most likely contemplating something as he placed a hand on his vermilion wine gourd. However, the two of them didn't talk about their struggles any further, lest they come across as too anxious and whiny. When vagrant cultivators came across more powerful immortals on the path of cultivation, being able to maintain a calm and peaceful relationship would already be a huge fortune. Vagrant cultivators wouldn't dare to dream of more. After traveling around the cultivation world outside the mountains for many years, this pair of young Dao partners had already become accustomed to seeing fellow vagrant cultivators die mysterious and miserable deaths. They were already numb to this, and they no longer felt a shared sense of grief. Both of them became tense when the young wanderer finally looked up again. I've entered Malicious Ghost Valley for the sake of training this time, and I didn't have any plans of looking for treasures, Chen Ping'an said. As such, I don't have any storage boxes or treasures on me. However, I came across something unexpected on Crow Peak just then, and I was mysteriously surrounded and attacked by a group of malicious ghosts and vicious spirits. Even though the situation was perilous, it could be said that I made some small gains in the end. Tell me if this works for you. The two of you are coincidentally carrying large boxes, so you can think of this as helping me carry out a few sets of those jade-like skeletons. I estimate that they can sell for a few lesser heat coins no matter what, so the two of you can sell them first when you return to the market at Helpless Pass. You can then wait for me for 1 month, and if I return you can take 20% of the profits as compensation. If I don't return within 1 month, however, then there's no need for the two of you to wait around any longer. You can keep the immortal coins no matter how much those sets of skeletons sell for. Zhuojing was astonished, and she was just about to say something in response. However, her husband grabbed her hand and held it firmly, cutting in before her and asking, "Young master, have you thought about the possibility of us leaving without waiting for you after obtaining the sets of skeleton and selling them for snowflake coins at the market? Is young master not worried about this?" Chen Ping'an smiled and replied, "Since I dared to propose this transaction, would I be worried about not being able to find 2 vagrant cultivators afterward? Why doesn't young master directly leave Malicious Ghost Valley with us?" the man asked. "We can act as porters for young master and earn some laborer's commission, and we'll be happy as long as we don't make a loss. That way, young master can also sell the sets of skeletons by himself." Chen Ping'an frowned and replied, "I said just then that I came to Malicious Ghost Valley for the sake of training, not to look for treasures and seek wealth. We can scrap this transaction if you're worried about this being a trap." The man glanced at the dense forest in the distance before laughing heartily and saying, "Then I'll accompany young master to Crow Peak. Money is falling from the heavens, so I'll be asking for divine punishment if I let slip such a wonderful opportunity. Young master can feel completely at ease. My wife and I will definitely stay at the market at Helpless Pass for 1 month to await young master's return." The man didn't allow his wife to turn down the offer, and he told her to take off the large box on her back before holding one in each hand and following Chen Ping'an to Crow Peak. He was dumbfounded when he saw the 5 sets of extremely high-quality skeletons, and he carefully placed them inside the 2 large wooden boxes. Meanwhile, the young wanderer wearing a bamboo hat squatted down nearby to examine the rusty suits of armor and weapons. In the end, when the Dao partners were each carrying a hefty wooden box on their backs and returning to the entrance of Malicious Ghost Valley along the small path, they still felt as if they were in a dream. They were in complete disbelief. The man remained silent for a long time before finally cracking a grin and saying, "This feels completely unreal. Does such good fortune really exist in the world?" his wife Zhuojing asked in a soft voice. The man turned his head and looked back, but the young wanderer wearing a bamboo hat was already nowhere to be seen. He turned back around and consoled, "The actions of mighty figures are surprising and unpredictable. We can just treat this as if we've come across a sword immortal." The man gradually connected some dots together, and he continued in a low voice, "Just think about it. How many vagrant cultivators dare to say they can sell for a few lesser heat coins no matter what? Are we able to say something? Even if we muster up some courage and pretend to be wealthy, can we say this as naturally as that young master? I suspect that he's definitely a direct disciple of a sect-level force, and he most certainly isn't a vagrant cultivator like we guessed in the beginning. It's because of this that he can act so liberally and conduct himself in such a generous manner. Of course, we can't forget the manner in which he threatened us either. Judging by his words, he's definitely an official immortal with an astonishing background." Zhuojing thought about this for a moment before smiling gently and saying, "Why do I feel like that young master was purposely saying some of those things without actually meaning them?" Her husband grimaced and replied, "What kind of cultivator will go to such extreme lengths just to be a good person? How extremely strange. Perhaps our act of sincerely praying and offering incense at the Swang River's river god temple before coming here has yielded results. Why can't that be the case?" Zhuojing responded with a smile. Chen Ping'an stood on a tall branch and watched the disappearing figures of the husband and wife. The look in his eyes was gentle, and he didn't retract his gaze for a long time. Leaning against the tree trunk, he eventually grabbed his sword-nurturing gourd and took a swig of wine, after which he smiled and remarked, "City Lord Pu is enjoying such a leisurely and carefree mood? Apart from overseeing White Cage City, City Lord Pu also needs to receive tributes from the 8 cities in the south, including Meticulous Skin City. If the information in the Be at Ease compilation isn't incorrect, then this year is coincidentally the end of the 60-year cycle when City Lord Pu needs to collect the tributes. In other words, City Lord Pu should be very busy right now." The skeleton swordsman in azure Confucian robes was standing atop a nearby tree, and he replied with a faint smile, "Those who are benevolent won't be able to survive long in malicious Ghost Valley. I understand now. City Lord Pu is curious about how I'm able to freely control the sword on my back, even though I'm clearly not a sword cultivator. Perhaps City Lord Pu wants to determine how much spiritual energy from my acupoints I need to exhaust in order to wield this sword? And that way, City Lord Pu can decide whether he wants to attack me or not." Chun Ping'an asked. The City Lord of White Cage City nodded and replied, "Indeed. However, I'm slightly disappointed by the results. Only a surprisingly small amount of spiritual energy is consumed, and by the looks of it, this is undoubtedly a pseudo-celestial tool that has already acknowledged its master. My cultivation base is so low, yet I'm in possession of such a valuable sword. So is City Lord Pu genuinely not tempted to make a move?" Chun Ping'an asked in puzzlement. Chun Ping'an asked this question because there was seemingly no murderous aura or killing intent radiating from City Lord Pu. Murderous aura was easy to conceal, but the same couldn't be said for killing intent. Pu Rang, a nascent tier heroic spirit and the City Lord of White Cage City, was one of the few spectating chi refiners who had eventually stepped onto the battlefield during that chaotic and soul-stirring conflict between several nations in the past. In the end, he had died at the hands of a group of Earth Immortal guest elders from various nations. It wasn't that Pu Rang hadn't had the opportunity to flee at the time, but he had stubbornly refused to retreat for some unknown reason. The Be at Ease compilation also offered no answers to this question, and the author of the book had even used his privilege for his own gains, especially making some further remarks following the descriptions of Pu Rang's life and death. "I once entrusted sect leader Zhu with personally asking Pu Rang a few questions when she visited White Cage City. City Lord Pu was once a nascent tier vagrant cultivator with high hopes of attaining the Great Tao, so why had he insisted on seeking death on the battlefield outside the mountains?" However, Pu Rang ignored this question, leaving the 1,000-year-old mystery unresolved. This is truly a great pity. These were naturally positive remarks. However, there was also no shortage of negative remarks about Pu Rang in the book. For example, Pu Rang was extremely domineering and impervious to reason, and almost half of the sword cultivators who had died in malicious Ghost Valley had died at Pu Rang's hands. Among his victims, there was no shortage of young prodigies from first-rate immortal sects and clans. These young prodigies were top-notch sword talents in the southern region of the northern complete reed continent, so a powerful sect-level force that was guarded by sword immortals had personally dispatched an unpolished jade-tier sword immortal south to Skeleton Shoal, visiting White Cage City with his sword. Both parties had suffered severe wounds, and the unpolished jade-tier sword immortal had almost dropped one cultivation base. When tearing open the sky of the mystical realm to leave, the sword immortal had further been struck by a sinister surprise attack from City Lord Pu, and had almost been killed on the spot. Even though he had survived, the paramount defensive treasure passed down through the generations in the ancestral hall had been destroyed as a result. This added further insult to the injury, and the unpolished jade-tier sword immortal had ended up suffering unfathomable losses. In fact, this was already a good outcome in the sense that Pu Rang hadn't seized the opportunity to push his advantage and further attack his uninvited guest. Otherwise, malicious Ghost Valley might have gained the Een spirit of an upper 5-tier sword immortal. An incredible feat with no historical precedent. In addition to this, Pu Rang had actively challenged 2 different sect leaders of the Flax Robe sect several times. In fact, Zhu Quan's having a damaged cultivation base and being unable to advance to the upper 5 tiers after so long could largely be attributed to malicious Ghost Valley's Pu Rang. He was the biggest culprit in delaying her cultivation. Of course, after engaging in those life-and-death battles, Pu Rang also comprehensively lost the opportunity to advance to the unpolished jade tier. he had suffered even greater losses. At this moment, Pu Reng glanced at the sword on Chen Ping'an's back and asked, "Sword practitioner?" Chen Ping'an nodded in response. "Then why did you ask such a question? Perhaps only living people are allowed to become swordsmen? Perhaps dead people don't have a chance?" Pu Reng asked. Chen Ping'an was slightly confused in the beginning, but he quickly came to a realization and cupped his fists in respect. Pu Reng pursed his mouth, and this could be regarded as him dismissing the matter with a smile. He then vanished without a trace. Chen Ping'an continued to travel north along the so-called official road after leaving Crow Peak, but he would definitely venture along the small paths forking off the road to take a look whenever he came across them, continuing all the way until he reached a dead end. Perhaps he would come across deep streams hidden amid the tall and undulating peaks, or perhaps he would come across tall cliffs and sheer mountain faces. As Chen Ping'an expected, Malicious Ghost Valley was brimming with mystery. When standing beside the mountain stream just then, he had detected members of the water race lying at the bottom of the stream and nurturing their souls. Even when Chen Ping'an squatted down and scooped up some water to wash his face, the demons hidden beneath the water were still able to hold back and refrain from attacking him. Since they were so cautious, Chen Ping'an also decided not to target them. As for the pair of steep cliffs facing each other, there was a suspension bridge connecting them together, yet the wooden planks of the bridge had already decayed completely, with only the lonely iron chain swaying slightly in the wind. Walking across this broken bridge wouldn't be difficult for chi refiners or pure martial artists, but Chen Ping'an saw a large and pitch-black python coiled around the middle of the bridge, with its body as thick as a corridor pillar. The python hissed softly, and not far away from it was an extremely wide spider web especially used for catching birds in the mountains. The head of the spider spirit was only as big as a fist, yet the spider spirit had already managed to successfully manifest the appearance of a human woman. If Taoist priests or Buddhist monks traveled here and witnessed this scene, perhaps they would step forward to slay the demons and eliminate the fiends, viewing this as an act of accumulating hidden virtue. In Chen Ping'an's view, however, even if the demons and fiends here wanted to feast on humans and commit grave sins, they needed to actually come across some humans first. Once again following a small fork path, Chen Ping'an ventured into the deep mountain forests, surprisingly coming across a rundown structure at the foot of a tall mountain that looked like a small resting station and temple. This structure wasn't recorded in the Be at Ease compilation, and Chen Ping'an planned to rest here for a moment before continuing to climb the mountain. Even though the small temple had no name and no fame, the Be at Ease compilation introduced this tall mountain as Treasure Mirror Mountain. There was a mountain stream at the waist of Treasure Mirror Mountain, and there was a legend pertaining to the origin of this stream and the name of the mountain. It was said that an immortal had been traveling around the world in the ancient past, yet they had accidentally dropped an extremely precious treasure mirror when coming across thunder guardians, lightning goddesses, and other deities summoning clouds and rain in this area. In the end, the lost treasure mirror had transformed into the mountain stream. In the Be at Ease complication, the cultivators of the Flax Robe sect speculated that the primordial treasure mirror was perhaps an immortal treasure on the surface, yet it was actually a mystical treasure that contained astonishing fated opportunities. This piqued Chen Ping'an's interest, so he wanted to explore this area and take a look. In any case, there was no concept of taking a detour or whatnot since he was simply in Malicious Ghost Valley to train. Chen Ping'an had always felt a sense of resignation toward fated opportunities in the past, feeling certain that he wouldn't enjoy any good fortune. However, things had changed a lot now, but he still couldn't become involved in fated opportunities pertaining to things such as the 8 wall paintings of the female heavenly officials in Mural City. As for the remaining fated opportunities, be that treasures with no owners in the immortal abodes of mystical realms or natural treasures born from heaven and earth, Chen Ping'an wanted to try his luck with all of these opportunities. Chen Ping'an built a small campfire in the rundown temple, and the flames flickered a faint dark green like the ghost fires in tombs. While he was eating dry rations, he noticed a short old man holding a wooden walking stick walking over from the small path outside, with a gourd hanging from his walking stick. However, Chen Ping'an paid no heed to the old man as he continued to eat his food. The short old man stood at the entrance of the small temple and asked with a smile, "Young master, are you planning to venture to the deep mountain stream of Treasure Mirror Mountain?" "That's correct," Chen Ping'an replied with a nod. The short old man sighed with emotion and said, Young master, this old man isn't trying to frighten you on purpose, but that region is genuinely crawling with extreme dangers. Even though it's called a stream, it's actually as deep and wide as a large lake, with the water so limpid that one can see the bottom. Perhaps staying true to that saying, the water is so clear that no fish can survive. 1. There's not a single fish in the stream, and neither birds in the sky nor beasts on the land dare to visit this stream to drink. In fact, there are often birds that lose their lives after diving into the stream. With the passing of time, this stream has gradually come to be known as the soul-restraining stream. There are piles of bones at the bottom of the stream, and apart from the skeletons of birds and beasts, there are also many skeletons belonging to those cultivators who doubted the dangers of the stream. The cultivation of these people went to waste, transforming into the water fortune of this stream. Qian Ping smiled and asked, "Then dare I ask, old mister, do you want me to visit the stream or do you want me to turn around and leave?" "Why do you ask this, young master?" The short old man appeared slightly puzzled as he continued, "I naturally hope that young master doesn't risk such great danger for the sake of enjoying some scenery. Since young master is a cultivator, what kind of magnificent scenery in the sky and on the earth have you not seen before? Is there any need to risk so much to see a mere mountain stream?" 1,000 years have passed, yet the cultivators of the flax robe sect are still unable to solve this mystery. Not only that, but how many terrestrial immortals have entered this mountain already? Yet, not a single one of them has managed to obtain the fated opportunity. Young master is clearly from a large and powerful clan, so there's no need for you to risk your life. This is all I'm going to say, lest young master misunderstand my intentions. Qian Ping glanced at the wooden walking stick of the short old man, which had a few green shoots, and he asked, "Old mister, perhaps you're the mountain lord of this region?" Holding the walking stick in one hand and stroking his beard with his other hand, the short old man smiled faintly and replied, "There doesn't exist the title of mountain lord in the mountains of malicious Ghost Valley, but there does indeed exist such a position. Thanks to some fool's luck, I was able to assume such a position. However, compared to those heroic spirits who are enjoying incense offerings and fortune in the large cities and towns, glowing as bright as the sun and moon, I'm nothing but a tiny speck of light. Dare I ask, old mister, what is your true identity?" Qian Ping asked. The short old man was incensed and he scolded, "How very disrespectful of you, young child. Even in the mortal empires and towns, Buddhist monks don't mention their names and Taoist priests don't talk about their age. As a cultivator, how can you ask mountain and river deities about their life before death? By the looks of it, you're most definitely not an official immortal. What's wrong? You're a measly vagrant cultivator who's unable to survive in the outside world. So you've come to malicious Ghost Valley in desperation, and are now exchanging your life for the fated opportunity of my treasure mirror mountain? Everything will be over if you die, but you'll obtain immense wealth if you survive." The short old man shook his head and turned around to leave, lamenting, "By the looks of it, another corpse is about to appear at the bottom of the stream." The gourd on his walking stick was lush green, appearing as if it had just been plucked from the vines. Qian Ping extended his hands over the campfire to warm them up, smiling as he did so. The short old man referred to himself as the Mountain Lord of Treasure Mirror Mountain. Yet his illusion techniques and ability to trick others were truly filled with shortcomings. They were barely worth a mention. He must have gone to some difficulty to find the wooden walking stick that was dry yet sprouting with a new lease on life, and the lush green gourd that was oozing with the smell of refreshing mountain wilderness. However, the short old man didn't conceal his foxy smell too well, and it was an iron rule of the majestic world that fox spirits couldn't become mountain gods. Qian Ping speculated that this old fox's true position was probably as the river guardian of the mountain stream. He hoped for Qian Ping to accidentally jump into the stream and kill himself, but he was also afraid of Qian Ping obtaining the fated opportunity pertaining to the treasure mirror, causing him to lose the foundation of his great Tao. It was because of these reasons that he had personally come here to confirm the situation. Of course, it was also possible that this old fox was the subordinate or lackey of some water god in Treasure Mirror Mountain. However, there were few records about the mountain gods and water gods in the Be at Ease compilation, and the book simply mentioned that there was a very small number of deities in malicious Ghost Valley. Generally speaking, only the heroic spirit city lords could be regarded as half-deities, while the remaining entities who self-proclaimed to be the official deities of mountains and rivers were far too undeserving and unauthentic. Chen Ping'an started to drink some wine. The old fox appeared outside the rundown temple again, saying with a slightly embarrassed expression, "I presume that young master has already seen through this old man's disguise, with my illusion techniques being truly measly and laughable. Indeed, I'm an old fox from West Mountain, and Treasure Mirror Mountain has never had any mountain lords or river guardians. I've lived and cultivated in Treasure Mirror Mountain ever since I was young, and I've indeed been relying on the spiritual energy of that mountain stream. However, I have a daughter who once made a vow when she attained Tao and assumed human form, saying that she was willing to marry the person who managed to swim through the mountain stream and retrieve the golden hairpin that she had accidentally dropped inside when she was little, regardless of whether this person was a cultivator, a ghost, or a spirit." The old fox sighed with emotion and continued, "I've already waited for several hundred years, and my breathtakingly beautiful but pitiful daughter has already received countless proposals from the nearby ghost generals. However, my daughter has turned all of them down, causing quite some displeasure among the ghost generals. If this continues, I'll no longer be able to stay at Treasure Mirror Mountain in the future. Now that I've come across such a proper-looking young master, however, I was thinking that this huge worry of mine can be alleviated if young master is able to retrieve the golden hairpin from the mountain stream. As for whether young master wants to take my daughter with you after retrieving the golden hairpin and upon leaving Malicious Ghost Valley, that's completely up to you. If you're willing to take my daughter with you, then I'm even less worried about whether you treat her as a mistress or treat her as a maidservant. The fox tribe from West Mountain has never cared about the etiquette of humans." Chen Ping'an shook his hands and replied, "I don't care what you're scheming, but just stay away from me. Okay? How many times are you going to gild the lily? Do you want me to count for you? Did I take things too far when talking about the golden hairpin?" the old fox asked in an uncertain voice. Chen Ping'an nodded and replied, "What do you think?" The old fox beat his chest and stomped his foot, turning around and fuming as he left. However, he suddenly stopped and looked back at Chen Ping'an, asking in resentment, "Why are you people from the outside world so sly and hard to trick? Perhaps the world beyond Malicious Ghost Valley is nothing but a nest of cheaters and swindlers." Chen Ping'an couldn't help but chuckle in speechlessness. The old fox glanced at the dry rations in Chen Ping'an's hand and started to curse, huffing, "You're also a poor bastard. You don't have money and you don't have good looks either. How can my daughter be attracted to someone like you? Hurry up and piss off, you shameless bastard. You actually dared to visit Treasure Mirror Mountain to search for treasures?" Chen Ping'an held up the small amount of dry rations remaining in his hand and replied with a faint smile, "I'll deal with you after I finish eating." The old fox from West Mountain hurriedly fled into the distance. Chen Ping'an rested for a brief while after finishing his food, following which he extinguished the campfire and sighed as he picked up a piece of firewood that wasn't completely burned through. He left the small and rundown temple, only to see a young woman dressed in red and green slowly walking over from a distance. Not only was she emaciated, but more importantly, Chen Ping'an immediately recognized her as the old fox from West Mountain who had hidden his wooden walking stick and lush green gourd at some unknown place. Chen Ping'an didn't hold back anymore, and he threw the piece of firewood in his hand, striking the forehead of the old fox whose illusion techniques and disguise skills were far inferior to Zhu Lian. The old fox flew through the air like a broken kite, crashing to the ground and convulsing twice before falling unconscious. He wouldn't regain consciousness anytime soon. Chen Ping'an started to slowly climb the mountain after finally getting some peace and quiet, but he couldn't help but falter when he arrived near the mountain stream. "Again? Can this old fox stop haunting me?" Chen Ping'an didn't say another word, and he grabbed a stone and weighed it in his hand before throwing it at the old fox again, this time with slightly more force. He had clearly been too benevolent at the rundown temple just then. A young woman was currently sitting atop a snow-white stone cliff beside the mountain stream with her back facing Chen Ping'an. There was a pair of embroidered shoes placed neatly beside her, and she was holding a small emerald green umbrella slanted diagonally in her hands and gently twirling it around. If Chen Ping'an hadn't experienced the disgusting things just then he definitely wouldn't have attacked immediately upon seeing the young woman. The stone directly tore through the small umbrella and smacked into the young woman's head with a crack, causing her to directly collapse to the ground. Chun Ping'an still held back, and he didn't directly aim for the back of the young woman's head, or else she would have directly fallen into the strange mountain stream. Instead, the young woman collapsed sideways before losing consciousness, facing no danger of rolling into the stream. Chun Ping'an didn't pay any more attention to the old fox from West Mountain. He took a deep breath and cautiously walked to the bank of the stream, gathering his focus as he observed the situation. Sure enough, the mountain stream was extremely deep, yet it was so limpid that he could see the bottom. Only the piles of white bones at the bottom of the stream flickered with a few faint specks of light, with the source of this light most likely being the spirit tools and other treasures of the deceased cultivators. After being eroded by the currents for hundreds upon thousands of years, the spiritual energy of these treasures was eaten away until only these faint specks of light remained. Chun Ping'an surmised that even if some of these treasures had been immortal tools before, they might not even be as valuable as spirit tools in their current state. Chun Ping'an was feeling slightly hopeful, and he wanted to follow these specks of light to see whether he could find one or two immortal treasures belonging to the water element. After sinking to the bottom of this mountain stream, perhaps the quality of such immortal treasures might even go up. However, Chun Ping'an remained alert and guarded against the soul-restraining stream the entire time, especially since there were strange beings who liked to jump into the stream to commit suicide in this place. Chun Ping'an suddenly turned around, only to see a short old man holding a walking stick with a hanging gourd running out from the mountain forest. He sprinted to the bank of the stream, wailing about how pitiful his daughter was. Now she had been killed before she even had the opportunity to marry. Chun Ping'an felt a slight headache. He looked up at the snow-white stone cave on the opposite side of the stream that was filled with bumps and pits, inside of which was seated a man in ragged clothes. The man stretched lazily before standing up and swaggering over to the stream, where he sat down and stuck his feet into the water. He laughed loudly and remarked, "White clouds overhead are my hat, green mountains around are my clothes, limpid water underfoot is my shoes. If I'm not an immortal, then who is an immortal?" The old fox from West Mountain suddenly raised his voice even more, scolding in anger. "Bastard, you're so poor that your third leg is almost about to stick out from the holes in your pants, yet you're still sitting here and trying to act all intelligent and scholarly? Don't you always holler about wanting to become my son-in-law? Well, my daughter has been killed by a wicked person now, yet what in the world are you doing? Care to explain?" The man leaned forward and placed his hands in the stream, taking a glance at Chun Ping'an before turning around to look at the old fox from West Mountain, smiling and replying, "Rest assured, your daughter is only unconscious, not dead. This person's attack was far too light-handed and mild, so much so that I was too embarrassed to step forward and play the hero. Otherwise, a lowly old fox such as yourself would have truly managed to obtain a perfect son-in-law. Perhaps even Pu Rang would have referred to you as a friend, and maybe even Skeleton Wall City would have invited you over as an esteemed guest." Cradled in the old fox's lap, the young woman who was his daughter slowly woke up, dazedly furrowing her brows as she came to. The old fox was so moved that he almost shed tears, and he said in a quivering voice, "You almost scared me to death, daughter. If you lost your life, then wouldn't that mean no betrothal gift from my future son-in-law?" A faint smile appeared on the young woman's face. She was already accustomed to her father's schemes and antics, and in any case, mountain spirits and entities adhered to a different set of etiquette from humans in the mortal world. Chun Ping'an looked toward the old fox and his daughter and apologized. "I'm sorry about just then, young lady." The young woman turned her head, seemingly too embarrassed and timid to look at a stranger. Not only that, but she even covered her face with one hand, using her other hand to pick up the small umbrella that now had a fresh hole. Only then did she breathe a sigh of relief. The old fox pushed aside the troublesome green umbrella and craned his neck, staring intently at the young bastard wearing a bamboo hat and shouting hysterically, "Is a simple I'm sorry going to cut it? My daughter is breathtakingly beautiful, so even losing a single strand of hair would be a massive loss. Yet you actually struck her on the head so hard. You need to pay the damages. At least 5. No, it needs to be at least 10 snowflake coins." Chun Ping'an lightly tossed over 10 snowflake coins, yet his gaze remained fixed on the shabbily dressed man the entire time. The old fox from West Mountain caught the snowflake coins, and it was as if the words forming in his mouth were pushed down his throat. He looked down at the immortal coins in his hands, a complicated look in his eyes. The man on the opposite side of the stream was still randomly slapping the water to wash his face, and he looked up and asked with a chuckle, "Why are you looking at me? I don't have any thoughts about killing you." Chen Ping'an smiled and replied, "That's good to hear." The man pointed at the young woman holding the small and emerald green umbrella, saying to Chen Ping'an, "However, things might change if you try to snatch her away from me." Chen Ping'an shook his head and didn't bother to say anything. Right at this moment, however, the young woman's extremely quiet voice gently flowed out from behind the small umbrella, saying, "Young master, dare I ask for your name? Why did you knock me unconscious with a stone? Did you see a golden hairpin at the bottom of the stream just then? Poor bastards, whichever one of you is richer is whichever one of you will become my son-in-law." The old fox from West Mountain suddenly announced loudly. Chen Ping'an paid no heed to the old fox's words. The man in ragged clothes sat with his back hunched, his cheek in one hand as his gaze shifted hesitantly between the small green umbrella and the bamboo hat. The man in ragged clothes who had been sleeping in the stone cave beside the mountain stream just then casually shook his sleeves, causing the stream water to surprisingly roll off and plop back into the stream like a string of snow-white beads. He smiled and asked, "Things have already come to this, so what do you say, young master?" "I don't have any money, so I won't compete with you," Chen Ping'an replied. The man was overjoyed, and he said with a nod, "Then I'll accept your goodwill." However, the old fox from West Mountain was unhappy with this result, and he forcefully slammed his wooden walking stick into the ground before raising two fingers and pointing at both Chen Ping'an and the man in ragged clothes, scolding, "I said just then, whichever one of you is richer is whichever one of you will become my son-in-law. There's not a drop of goodwill to be had. Young man wearing the bamboo hat, you were very generous with your immortal coins just then, and when I purposely tested your character, you passed all of my examinations with no issues. The only thing that's missing now is for you to do the deed with my daughter. You need to cherish this opportunity. If my daughter leaves with you, she'll most likely not need to worry about food and shelter for the rest of her life. She'll be able to wear extravagant clothes and jewelry, and perhaps she'll become even more of a noble lady than those female officials serving meticulous skin cities Fan Yun Luo. As for that beggar, he's already been drinking the chilly wind here for quite a few months. I'm acutely aware of just how miserable and pathetic he is, and there's nothing more boastful in the world than his mouth. No, that won't do. My daughter was born to enjoy a good life, and she won't be able to endure any hardships. I definitely won't allow my precious daughter to jump into a fire pit." This was quite an eye-opening experience for Chen Ping'an. He had traveled all over the world during the past few years, and he had witnessed a mountain god's wedding ceremony. He had seen a fox spirit tricking a scholar, and had encountered a city god taking a mistress. However, he had never come across someone marrying off their daughter so carelessly. The ordinary-looking man in ragged clothes appeared slightly exasperated as he said, "Father-in-law, I might not have any money on me, not even a single snowflake coin, and I won't be dishonest about this as your son-in-law. However, I genuinely made a huge deal before coming to malicious Ghost Valley, and I was left with no option but to sell my minimization treasure, as well as all of the immortal coins and immortal tools inside for a discounted price. However, I'm truly not a poor person." The old fox was enraged, and he forcefully slammed his walking stick into the ground several times and yelled hysterically, "You're trying to trick me again. Piss the fuck off. These basic eyes of mine only care about money." Chen Ping'an retrieved a handful of snowflake coins and said, "These are all the immortal coins I have left on me." The old fox appeared slightly sickly as he mumbled, "You always speak in a mysterious and roundabout manner, so I can't gauge whether you're telling the truth or not. However, this doesn't matter, and you're still a better choice than that beggar. It's decided. You're going to become my son-in-law. In the future, the bloodline of the Fox tribe from West Mountain will be up to you to continue and spread. You need to put your waist into it while you're still young and strong." "Oh, that's right. My daughter's maiden name is Wei Taijin, and she also has a good-for-nothing younger brother called Wei Gaowu. We'll be one big family in the future, so remember to look after your brother-in-law in the future. When the three of you leave malicious Ghost Valley together in the future, help him marry 17 or 18 celestial maidens if the opportunity arises." However, Chen Ping'an extended his hand toward the man in ragged clothes. The man smiled knowingly and said, You can lend these immortal coins to me, and it will naturally be even better if you can straight up give them to me. That way, I'll be someone with money." The eyes of the old fox darted around. This young man wasn't a helper called over by that beggar, was he? Were they working together to trick him and his daughter? The young woman hiding behind the small emerald green umbrella asked in a timid voice. "Young master, there's only one matter that I want to ask about. Did you see a golden hairpin at the bottom of the stream?" Chun Ping'an shook his head and replied honestly, "No, I didn't." The young woman sighed softly and slowly stood up, but much of her slender and elegant figure was still hidden behind the small green umbrella. The umbrella was just as exquisite and adorable as its master, yet the fresh hole torn into it by the rocks slightly ruined the scenery. The young woman's voice was surprisingly cold, yet it also carried with it the innate charm and seductiveness of Foxian women. This was perhaps the innate mystical power of fox spirits in this world. "Don't take offense at my dad, young master. Just treat his words like a joke," the young woman said. She then tugged at the old fox's sleeve and said in a gentle voice, "Let's leave, Dad." The old fox shot an angry glare at the young man wearing a bamboo hat who was looking more and more like a scammer by the moment. He humped coldly and said, "Marriage is an important matter that can't be taken lightly, so we'll discuss this again in the future." The old fox from West Mountain hurriedly left with his umbrella-carrying daughter. Due to his chaotic gait, the lush green gourd tied to his walking stick violently swayed back and forth. The mountain stream quickly regained its peace and quiet following the departure of the two fox spirits. There were no singing birds, and the mountains and waters were tranquil and silent. There was a hint of lifelessness and deathly silence hidden behind this peaceful atmosphere. Chun Ping'an put the handful of snowflake coins back inside his sleeves. The man in ragged clothes smiled and said, "I, Yang Chongxian, owe you half a favor for this." Chun Ping'an shook his head and replied, "There's no need to be so polite. I was simply thinking that it would be a better choice to avoid potential trouble." The man didn't say anything else, potentially because he was so hungry that he didn't have any energy left. He found a relatively even section of the stone cliff to lie down and zone out. Chun Ping'an took off his bamboo hat and focused his gaze on the specks of light in the stream that were like the flickering glows of fireflies on a summer's night. Since he had come to treasure Mirror Mountain, he was naturally going to aim for the fated opportunities and immortal treasures. Even though the chances were small, one's efforts would ultimately be the deciding factor. There were indeed people in the world who could lie down and become rich from doing nothing, but this was only a minuscule number of people, after all. Many more people earned money like vagrant cultivators, taking things slowly and one step at a time. Even if they were fortunate enough to come across fated cultivation opportunities, these opportunities would generally be accompanied by dangers. As such, people needed to be as cautious as they could be, and they might even need to put their lives on the line. A good example of this was the Dao partners at the lower 5 tiers who should have already returned to Helpless Pass by now. After scouring the surroundings and picking and choosing, going through many hardships and difficulties, they had failed to scrape together even a single snowflake coin's worth of items until they reached Crow Peak. If they had continued north to Green Cottage Town, there was every possibility that they would have both been killed, living up to their relationship as Dao partners and even going as far as to die together. As for the name Yang Chongxian, Chun Ping'an went through this in his mind but couldn't recall anything. There was no record of this person in the Be at Ease compilation. Chun Ping'an decided to remember this name for the moment. He most likely wasn't a heroic spirit city lord of malicious Ghost Valley, beings who were like the deity of a region. Similarly, he most likely wasn't a powerful spirit of White Cage City, who listened to orders but still maintained his independence. In other words, he was most likely a peculiar cultivator who had come here to train. As for his cultivation base, this was something that couldn't be underestimated. This was because Chun Ping'an couldn't gauge his cultivation base at all. At the entrance archways of malicious Ghost Valley, the elder in black robes had suppressed his aura and concealed his true spirit, yet Chun Ping'an had still managed to guess that he was at least a golden core tier sword cultivator. Of course, there was also a very big possibility that Yang Chongxian was nothing more than a pseudonym. Chun Ping'an's feeling of apprehension toward White Cage City's Pu Rang was largely because of his extremely high cultivation base. For some reason, however, Chun Ping'an felt like Yang Chongxian gave off an even more dangerous aura than Pu Rang. This definitely wasn't because Yang Chongshuan's cultivation base was higher than Pu Rang, who was at the peak stage of the nascent tier. Even though Qian Ping'an was unable to determine Yang Chongshuan's cultivation base, he could still vaguely discern that it was slightly inferior to Pu Rang's state of seeming unity with heaven and earth. On the path of cultivation, these small barriers oftentimes became insurmountable gulfs. Lying beside the stream, Yang Chongxian crossed his legs and chuckled. If you've come here to seek the biggest fated opportunity of Treasure Mirror Mountain, then I suggest that you forget about it. I suggest that you also don't observe the stream and search for treasures for too long, or else your soul will suddenly start to shiver, and your body will lose control. Your mind will become unstable, and your soul will leave your body and funnel into the stream like flowing water. At that time it will be extremely difficult to get your soul back. Moreover, those under the level of Earth Immortal won't notice these anomalies at all. I'm telling you about the secret of Treasure Mirror Mountain silently, devouring the souls of unsuspecting victims because I owed you half a favor for just then. Now we're even. It was said that this mountain stream was formed from a treasure mirror that had dropped to the ground, but this was nothing more than a story purposely fabricated by the Flax Robe Sect's Be at Ease compilation to frighten people. This wasn't to say that the old fossils from back then who liked to interact with dead people and burial objects had been worried about outsiders snatching this fated opportunity from the Flax Robe Sect. Rather, the treasure at the mountain stream was not only extremely difficult to find, but ordinary cultivators who ventured to this place would face a huge risk of suffering the same fate as those birds, beasts, and fellow cultivators at the bottom of the stream, transforming into the water fortune of the stream. In addition, Earth Immortal victims would have half their soul restrained by the water and unable to break free, with only the remaining half of their soul being allowed to enter reincarnation. As such, even if they managed to successfully reincarnate and become humans again, they would, as cultivators, suffer the huge taboo of having an incomplete soul. As for why I'm able to cultivate here, this is naturally because I came here well prepared. Yang Chongxian only revealed half the full story, since revealing too much would probably raise suspicion instead. He swung a leg back and forth and continued lazily, I'm a fairly whimsical person and I like to learn a bit of everything. However, that makes me a jack of all trades and master of none. Qian Ping'an retracted his gaze upon hearing this, and he once again put on his bamboo hat. He planned to leave Treasure Mirror Mountain straight away. When it came to natural treasures that were born from the will and fortune of the world, for example peculiar flowers and plants in immortal mystical realms, it was imperative that one obtain them in a proper and justified manner. Neither one could be missing, and it was also extremely important to take into account the opportune time, geographical advantage, and popular support. This pertained to what specific person was at what specific place during what specific season and time, and what specific method they used and what specific secret treasure they brought as a vessel. Everything was linked together. Simply possessing a high cultivation base was nowhere near enough to satisfy all of these requirements. It was clearly recorded in the Be at Ease compilation that the City Lord of Immortal Temple City had been hellbent on obtaining the fated opportunity of Treasure Mirror Mountain, yet they had failed to make any progress even after struggling hard for 100 entire years. Unwilling to give up, the City Lord had mobilized a large number of subordinates, borrowing 1,000 or so entities from 3 nearby friendly cities in addition to the ghosts from their own city. Not only that, but the City Lord had even borrowed a group of talisman warriors especially used for creating peaks and moving mountains. Indeed, the City Lord's plan was to directly upheave Treasure Mirror Mountain and carry it away, moving the entire mountain back to Immortal Temple City. After exhausting a huge amount of resources and ghostly power, however, the City Lord had been left with absolutely nothing to show for it. The huge operation had ended in complete failure. This was a clear reflection of just how difficult it was to obtain the fated opportunity at Treasure Mirror Mountain. If one wanted to receive recognition and a pledge of allegiance from one of the female heavenly officials at Mural City, then one could perhaps only rely on fate. If one wanted to obtain the treasure mirror at Treasure Mirror Mountain, however, it was a complete mystery what was required to do so. The Flax Robe Sect didn't know, and malicious Ghost Valley didn't know either. However, Qian Ping'an quickly changed his mind. Since he was here, he should at least give it a go. There were some deep-rooted habits that he needed to change. He shouldn't always resign himself to the thought that he wouldn't obtain any additional fated opportunities. The old fox from West Mountain sighed again and again as he descended Treasure Mirror Mountain with one hand holding his walking stick and one hand stroking his beard. Meanwhile, the young woman appeared slightly absent-minded. Taizhen, how about you just marry that ghost general from Three Battle City? That entity is the bravest general serving the city lord of Three Battle City. After all, and ordinary entities don't even come close to comparing to him. Compared to the entities with huge and bloody maws or barely any flesh on their bones, this ghost general also has a relatively decent appearance. In fact, it won't be an exaggeration to call him a handsome junior in this place. There was a sullen look on Wei Taizhen's face. Yes, that traveling Taoist priest from back then did say that your ideal man had to be someone who could see the golden hairpin at the bottom of the deep stream when talking about your marriage back then, but how many years have already passed? The old fox asked in exasperation. 200 years? Or 300 years? If this were in the world outside malicious Ghost Valley, then your grandson's grandson's grandson would already be old enough to marry and have kids. The young woman was extremely bored, and she gently twirled the small green umbrella which was now decorated with an extra hole. She glanced back at the waste of Treasure Mirror Mountain and murmured in reply, "Don't rush me, Dad, just wait for a little longer. Give me 100 years at most. If I still don't come across the right person, then I'll relent and get married to someone else." The old fox sighed in grief and stressed. When that time comes, you definitely have to marry a wealthy person, and it would be best if they're not too ghostly. Also, they definitely need to be dutiful, and they need to treat their father-in-law well. Apart from abundant betrothal gifts, they also need to show me respect and offer me gifts from time to time. As for you, make sure not to forget about me after you get married. Whether or not your father can live a carefree and comfortable life in the future is completely up to you and your future husband. Wei Taizhen hesitated for a moment before suddenly asking, "Dad, was the ghost general of Three Battle City telling the truth? Will the city lord of Three Battle City truly build a shrine for Dad to become a water god and enjoy incense offerings if I get married to the ghost general?" The old fox sniggered in ridicule and replied, "Even the promises of humans can't be trusted, so how can the promises of ghosts be trusted? A mountain god or water god in malicious Ghost Valley. Are you not aware of just how extraordinarily valuable these positions are? Out of all the city lords in the north and the south, just how many of them are mountain gods or water gods? With our background and status, we wouldn't dare to dream about forming a godly body and becoming a mountain god. The rules of the Confucian sages are strict and inflexible, so who would dare to go against them? In saying that, there is a slim opportunity when it comes to becoming a water god. However, it's a shame that I have some self-awareness and understand that I don't have the fortune or ability to become a water god. I'm cultivating a minor water element immortal technique from some damaged secret scripture, and using the most basic and stupid method to secretly drink the water fortune of Treasure Mirror Mountain and slowly raise my cultivation base is already my absolute limit." Wei Taizhen smiled sweetly and asked, "Dad, you're afraid of the pain that comes from the process of becoming a deity, right? The pain of seemingly being shaved apart and having your soul burn in boiling oil." The old fox was quite a shameless being and he replied, "Naturally. Regardless of whether it's living beings, dead beings or mountain spirits alike, everyone in the world wants to enjoy a good life. Why is it relatively easier for the heroic spirits of mortal empires to become deities? This is because they're protected by their nation's fortune and accompanied by merit and virtue. On the other hand, why is it so fatally dangerous for spirits and ghosts to become deities? This is naturally because they're far removed from the mortal world and unable to accumulate enough hidden virtue to pay the heavens. Just how many living people have I seen in malicious Ghost Valley in my entire life? I've got piss all hidden virtue. In any case, I trick to death all of the cultivators whom I come across, encouraging those chi refiners to observe the mountain stream and thus lose their souls. For the past several hundred years, I've walked around Treasure Mirror Mountain once every tomb sweeping festival, offering incense in the small censer mounds. Am I doing this for fun? No, of course not. I'm doing this because of the guilt in my heart." The old fox suddenly stomped his foot for some unknown reason, fuming. "My darling daughter is so beautiful, so how come those few city lords haven't taken an interest in you? To say nothing of a sparrow becoming a phoenix and becoming the proper wife of a city lord. Just becoming a favored mistress would already be enough for your father and your good-for-nothing little brother to enjoy a huge rise in status. At that time, would we still need to hole up at a shitty place like Treasure Mirror Mountain, staring at each other and waiting for death? Take that huge libertine from Pink Gentleman City, for example. He was still hollering about bringing you over on a lavish sedan chair carried by 8 people and getting married to you in the past. Yet how has he suddenly become so calm and free of desires these past few years? How is he not attracted to you anymore? There was an innocent look on Wei Taizhen's face. Could she force other people to like her or dislike her? She had a pair of very beautiful eyes. The old fox sighed with emotion. The fox tribe from West Mountain was growing fewer and fewer in number, and there were already very few of them left. He had heard that there was a place in the eastern treasured Vile continent where the fox tribe was flourishing, but he was extremely confident that his darling daughter would definitely still be a top-notch beauty even if she went there.